Chapter 630. Thank me? Yunyang asked with a frown, why? I know what you're thinking. Shangguan Lingxiu said, everything you've done for the Shangguan family, I'm very clear about it. Including gifting cultivation methods at the beginning, to teaching them later, and now sending them to Bao-er's side, all of this is for the Shangguan family. Yunyang chuckled. Sister Lingxiu, you're being too serious. Everything is due to fate. Why would I have so many thoughts? Especially now that the 6 children are here, they're basically a great help to me. How can it be that I'm the one who's helping them? This doesn't make sense. As he spoke, he was about to change the topic. Shangguan Lingxiu refused to budge and said seriously, I mean it when I say it's clear. Bao-er is His Majesty's favorite child. The Crown Prince is going against the grain now and has lost the people's trust. If Bao-er can grow up successfully and have some ability, some things are basically set in stone. When the time comes, my 6 children who have grown up with Bao will naturally be the ones he trusts and relies on the most. More accurately, they'll be the earliest batch of subordinates. If that's the case, it won't be easy even if the Shangguan family of generals wants to fall. Yunyang kept quiet for a bit and said, there's nothing absolute in this world. If the outcome isn't as expected, or if something happens along the way, bringing the 6 children here now would be like tying the Shangguan family of generals to an irreversible war chariot. If there's really a 1 in a million chance, the Shangguan family of generals will face a situation even more severe than what it's facing now. Shangguan Lingxiu smiled. There are many things in life that one needs to choose and stand on one side. It's impossible to get everything without giving anything. Up until now, we still have the upper hand in this gamble of life. Even if there's a mishap and the situation doesn't turn out as expected, the Shangguan family still has at least 6 pillars of support no matter how it develops. It won't be any worse than it is now. Yunyang could only nod. This is the truth. Indeed. The 2 of them walked forward in silence. The guards behind them followed them from a distance. No one dared to disturb them. Actually, as long as they grow up quickly, you'll be able to let go of the Shangguan clan's matters as soon as possible. You'll be able to free yourself from the shackles you've been carrying for far too long. Yunyang sighed softly, responsibility has to be handed over when it's time. Every generation's responsibility will be passed on to the next generation. It's better for you to do this as soon as possible. There was no doubt that Yunyang's words came from the bottom of his heart. He truly felt sorry for Shangguan Lingxiu, but it was only the literal meaning, there was no other meaning behind it. However, in Shangguan Lingxiu's ears, there was obviously another meaning to his words. Let go of everything related to the Shangguan clan as soon as possible? Undo the shackles I've put on myself? Hand over responsibility? Shifting the responsibility? The faster the better? Shangguan Lingxiu could not help but overthink. What did he mean? Does he think that I'm wasting my youth? Was that why they made such an arrangement? Help me solve my problems so that I no longer have any worries or burdens? Also, what did he mean when he said the faster the better? Could he not bear to see me waste my youth? Or, could he not wait any longer? The more Shangguan Lingxiu thought about it, the more her heart pounded. Her pretty face was already flushed red. As she pondered, even her neck and ears were flushed. Yunyang's heart skipped a beat when he saw how the usually valiant, iron-blooded general had suddenly turned bashful right out of the mouth of his thoughts. I'm speaking from my heart, the truth. How did I hit on her again? How did I put this? Yunyang thought back urgently. What he had said just now was the truth from the bottom of his heart. There did not seem to be any problem. Shangguan Lingxiu sighed in melancholy and said in a low voice, yes, this responsibility. I want to pass it on as soon as possible, thinking of how her nephews were still a few years away from the age where they could reluctantly take over her responsibilities, she could not help but feel downcast once more. A few years? That was a few years. She was already 23 years old now. How old would she be in a few more years? How old would Yunyang be now? How could his state of mind not change in these few years? How could Ji Lingxi allow these few years to pass by in vain? As long as she took a step forward in these few years, would it not be hopeless for her then? She could not possibly marry him and become his concubine in the future, could she? As she thought about it, Shangguan Lingxiu felt a wave of melancholy wash over her. When she snapped out of it, she realized that Yunyang was looking at her in surprise. Shangguan Lingxiu could not help feeling exasperated. Not to mention that this fellow was insensitive. Even if he could understand her daughter's thoughts, how could she take that step now? Sigh, it might not be a bad thing if he could remain ignorant and insensitive forever. It would be best if he could be a little dumber in this aspect. That would be the best. In spite of it, Shangguan Lingxiu felt that her thoughts were just wishful thinking, presumptuous and delusional. This person's true identity was Supreme Cloud, the Nine Supremes' think tank. Others might not be able to read the mood, but how could Supreme Cloud be completely clueless? Young brother Yun, if you're free, why don't you accompany me for a drink? Shangguan Lingxiu let go of all her worries and made her request, recovering her valiant demeanor in an instant. Since everything in the future could not be grasped, it was better to cherish what was in front of them and grasp the present. To create more time and conditions for the two of them to spend time together. When there was a will, there was hope. Even if they were to be disappointed in the end and be alone for the rest of their lives, it would be good to have a memorable memory in their lives. Sister Lingxiu's invitation is exactly what this young brother wishes for. Yunyang heaved a sigh of relief and thought, speaking of drinking, no one is better at it than I am. As long as we don't talk about feelings, we can talk about anything. We can talk about anything in the martial world or the imperial court. Let's go, let's go. Nothing in the world is more boring than getting drunk. Shangguan Lingxiu sighed. Of course, of course. Yunyang looked at Shangguan Lingxiu's expression and felt that this elder sister did not seem to be in a good mood. There must be something that she was too embarrassed to talk about and wanted to talk about it with the excuse of being drunk. Or perhaps she just wanted to vent the frustration in her heart. No matter which it was, Yunyang felt that it was his duty to accompany her for this drink and that he should press forward. Chapter 631. Just any place will do. Shangguan Lingxiu looked at Yunyang, who was leading the way with big strides. No, to Aroma Tavern. Why? I like Aroma Tavern. There's a sky room there. Shangguan Lingxiu was speechless. Brother, can you stop acting like a popinjay in front of me? Aroma Tavern. It was the busiest time for business. There was a sea of people everywhere. It was like a market inside while there were still a lot of people queuing outside. A few waiters who were welcoming the guests saw two people walking over from afar. Their eyes shone at first, but when they looked over, they groaned inwardly. It was because the one in front was the young lady of the Shangguan family. This was nothing much, but the one behind, the other identity was extraordinary. Young Master Yun. King Xiaoyao's heir, Yunyang. In Tiantang City, there was hardly anyone who did not know of this young Master Yun's name and temper. From being the top popinjay in Tiantang City, the pinnacle of gluttony, to being an expert in cultivation who could do whatever he wanted. Which of the young masters of Tiantang City had not been bullied by young Master Yun before? Ravaged? As a veteran of the Aroma Tavern, she had seen this young Master Yun collect protection fees from the young masters of the Aroma Tavern a few times. Their faces had turned pale from the amount he had collected, but none of them had dared to say anything. I wonder if there are any vacancies at this time. Shangguan Lingxiu was not used to bullying others. Seeing the sea of people, she immediately remembered that there were no reservations. It's just a small matter. Leave it to this young brother. Before her words echoed in the air, Yun Yang had already charged over with his head held high. Since I've come here, it would be embarrassing if I didn't have a room. Aroma Tavern was the most famous restaurant in Tiantang City. It had always been known for its booming business, and it was normal for it to be overcrowded. Those who wanted to feast here would basically have to make a reservation in advance. However, with Yun Yang and Shengguan Lingxiu's status, they did not need to make a reservation. They would start eating whenever they arrived. What? Reservation? Why don't you try saying that to me? Have you thought about it or not? Shengguan Lingxiu might not do anything, but Yun Yang would definitely give her a tight slap. A popinjay should behave like a popinjay. If you dare to tell me that you're making a reservation, I'll tear down your lousy building in minutes. Is there still a place to eat in this shabby building of yours? Yun Yang asked with his nose in the air. If young Master Yun wants to eat, of course there will be a place to serve you, the waiter said hurriedly. Another waiter had already rushed in to inform the boss. It did not take long before a chubby middle-aged man came running out, his face drenched in sweat. Oh my, young Master Yun, your presence brings light to our humble shop. Please come in. Is there another place? Yun Yang asked. Yes, yes, yes. I need a quiet place where no one can eavesdrop. Yes, yes, yes. The place has to be big enough. Young master, please go upstairs. How about hall number 1? The boss wiped his sweat. Yun Yang was furious. Are you looking down on me? Do you think I can't afford it? Why isn't it the number 1 heaven on the top floor? Then. The fat boss looked like he was in a dilemma. The third prince has decided, make him scram. Yun Yang's words were written all over the boss's face. This. The boss was sweating profusely. He was like a dying fish that had been lifted out of the water, his mouth opening and closing, not knowing what to say. God, that's the third prince. You're asking him to scram with just 3 simple words, even if you dare to say so, I don't dare. The third prince's men are here? Yun Yang snorted, his tone filled with disdain. The fat boss of the Redolent Inn was originally a steward of the fourth prince's maternal uncle. On the surface, it was said that he had left the residence of imperial uncle and was self-reliant, but in reality, he was using this inn to amass wealth for the fourth prince. If it were not for the fourth prince's support, how could a servant like him become the head boss of a famous restaurant in Yutong's capital city? With this knowledge, Yun Yang would not be courteous with him. Although His Highness the third prince hasn't arrived yet, someone from the residence of third prince is already here. This lowly one is in a difficult position. The fat boss looked pale. Difficult my *SS. Move aside. Yun Yang pushed him away and strode into the inn. Shengguan Lingxiu quickly pulled him back. Young brother Yun, it's the same wherever we eat. There's no need to complicate matters, how can that be? Yun Yang was defiant. We're giving this in face by coming here. Other than the number 1 heaven, none of the other rooms are befitting of our identities. How can our identities be neglected? Shengguan Lingxiu wanted to say that the third prince's identity was not weaker than theirs, but she instinctively recalled that Yun Yang's identity, cultivation path, and hidden identity were not something the third prince could compare to. If Yun Yang were to give in just like that, she might not be happy about it. Of course, there was still a reason for this, as the saying went, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. No matter how valiant and heroic Shengguan Lingxiu was, she could not escape this unbreakable truth. A strand of thought strayed her train of thought. When she recalled that Yun Yang's identity was high and mighty, he was still a subject after all. No matter how incompetent the third prince was, he was still of royal blood after all. In spite of this momentary thought, Yun Yang had already barged into the building. A series of thumping footsteps could be heard, heading straight for the top floor. Shangguan Lingxiu frowned but did not say anything more, following him. She pondered further now. No matter how arrogant Yun Yang appeared, it was not his true nature after all. His true identity was Supreme Cloud. Why would the 9 Supremes think tank do such a ridiculous thing? There must be an ulterior motive. There was only one room on the top floor, overlooking Tiantang City. The room's door was shut tight, but faint chatter and laughter could be heard coming from within. Yun Yang strode over and kicked the door open without a word. The 3 of them were talking to each other when they suddenly heard a loud noise. They turned their heads in surprise at the same time. Yun Yang, who was dressed in purple, strode into the room and said with his nose in the air, "Scram, all of you inside. I want to drink and talk in this room today. I don't want anyone to disturb me." One of the brocade-robed men was enraged. He stood up abruptly and said angrily, "Yun Yang, what do you mean by this? This room is used by His Highness the Third Prince to entertain distinguished guests. How dare you be so presumptuous?" Although the person who spoke had a face full of anger, although his aura was overbearing, and his words were cold, the moment he opened his mouth, he brought up the Third Prince. This already showed that this person was only putting on a brave front, but was actually weak inside. Yun Yang was unfazed as he said coldly, "Since it's the Third Prince who wants to entertain guests, then let the Third Prince talk to me himself." "Who do you think you are to talk to me? I'll count to 3 now. If all of you still don't scram, I'll strip you all naked and throw you out. Do you think I dare to do so?" He raised 3 fingers and said, "1. The middle-aged man was so angry that he almost spat blood. His eyes were spitting fire, his hair and beard bristling. Yun Yang bent his 2nd finger and said with a light smile, 2. The 3 of them gritted their teeth, panting heavily, but they did not move. Yun Yang bent his 3rd finger slowly, a cold glint shooting from his eyes as he said coldly, "No need to recite." Chapter 632. Yun Yang's 3rd finger was only curled halfway, but he scoffed coldly, "Wouldn't it have been better if you had been so F***king obedient from the start? How old are you now? F***king playing with my bottom line. I want all of you to vanish in the time it takes for me to close my eyes." As he spoke, he had already closed his eyes. The trio gritted their teeth, but there was nothing they could do. They could only pretend to be angry as they flung their sleeves and walked out in a single file. When the 3rd person walked to Yun Yang had just opened his eyes. When their gazes met, Yun Yang was enraged. "What a bastard! I can actually see you when I open my eyes. It looks like you really don't take my words to heart." Then, he sent another kick into the air. The person was struck without any room for resistance. With a cry, he was flung out of the door like a rocket, flying horizontally in the air. After crashing through the window on the opposite side, he flew another 300 feet before he crashed into a crow's nest on a tree, shattering it into pieces. Only then did he land on his butt in the nest, stuck by a tree branch. "You?" The other 2 men were enraged, but they only dared to utter the word "you." They could not do anything else. Yun Yang did not speak. He looked at them with a smile, as if waiting for them to continue, as if he wanted to find fault with them further. The 2 of them shuddered, and like stray dogs, they rushed out of the door, looking like stray dogs in the vast expanse of the world. "See that? It's not quiet now." Yun Yang looked at Shangguan Lingxiu, who was dumbfounded. Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes were wide as saucers as she stared at Yun Yang like she did not know him at all. What are you doing?" Anyone who knew that Yun Yang was Supreme Cloud would have reacted the same way when they saw the scene. The idol in their hearts, the lover of their dreams, their morals shattered and their worldview destroyed could not be described. Yun Yang said matter-of-factly, of course it's to find a comfortable place for us to drink and talk. Shangguan Lingxiu was exasperated. You're still pretending. Do you really think I don't know what your secret is? Unfortunately, I happen to know your true identity. I want to see how long you can continue pretending and to what extent. I'm going to fight it out with you. She waved her hand, and the guards took the initiative to leave. In the blink of an eye, there were only 2 people left in the room. Just as Shangguan Lingxiu was about to speak, she heard the sound of footsteps coming from outside again. A fragrant aroma wafted into her nostrils. The dishes were already being served. She had no choice but to shut her mouth. Not long after, more than 10 dishes of delicacies were served. Yunyang stopped them. These are more or less enough. I don't fancy your wine. There's no need to embarrass yourself. I've brought my own exquisite brew. Shangguan Lingxiu continued to stare in bewilderment as she watched Yunyang stretch out his hand and a pot of wine appeared in it, as if he had created it out of thin air. Lady Lingxiu was shocked once more, focusing her attention on the ring on Yunyang's finger. Sister Lingxiu, the wine I'm treating you to today is no ordinary wine. Yunyang said like he was presenting a treasure, this is the wine personally brewed by the god of wine, Feng Xiang'e. There aren't many pots left in this world. Let's get drunk today. We won't go home until we're drunk. Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes gleamed as she said sweetly, very well. She did not stand on ceremony, grabbing 2 large bowls and breaking the clay seals with a loud smack, pouring 2 full bowls of wine. Yunyang's eyebrows twitched as he watched, stunned. It was the first time he had seen a woman drink so freely and so generously, especially when the person in question was a stunning beauty. It was a feast for the eyes, and it was unprecedented. Once the wine was opened, the aroma of the wine rose into the air. The image of 2 phoenixes could be vaguely seen in the room, hovering in the air and not dissipating for a long time. What a great wine! It actually has such a mystical image accompanying it. Shangguan Lingxiu exclaimed in admiration. She picked up the bowl and smiled, lowering her voice as she spoke through telepathy, this is a toast to Lord Supreme Cloud. Thank you, Lord Supreme Cloud, for everything you've done for the Empire of Yutong all these years. She finished her words in one gulp. Yunyang was dumbstruck. He picked up the bowl of wine but it froze in front of his mouth, he was like a statue. How did she know? After a long time, he forced a smile on his stiff face and said, Sister Lingxiu, what you're saying? Shangguan Lingxiu smiled and said, last time, at the Lunar River. I was surprised to find out that you fell asleep. Yunyang was hit with a sudden realization and could not help chuckling dryly, I see, he thought about it and nodded, saying, I see. He lifted his head and finished the bowl of wine, shaking his head and chuckling, I thought that my identity would remain unnoticed. I didn't expect it to be a joke. Shangguan Lingxiu's expression turned serious as she said, in this lifetime, I will never speak of this matter. If I break this promise, the entire Shangguan family of generals will be in trouble. Yunyang nodded when he heard this but did not stop him. Supreme Cloud's identity was too important. Even though Yunyang trusted Shangguan Lingxiu, he could not stop this promise. Moreover, Shangguan Lingxiu's promise was directly related to the future of the Shangguan family of generals. Her sincerity was evident. Shangguan Lingxiu raised her second bowl of wine and said, Now, young Master Yun, can young brother Yun explain today's actions? Even though I am well aware of the reason behind it, it still makes me quite depressed. Yunyang laughed and said, Sister Lingxiu, you think too highly of Yunyang. Yunyang is still Yunyang most of the time. What happened today is really just a coincidence. He smiled and said, the so-called coincidence, the 2 of us drinking together here is truly a coincidence. As for the 3rd prince's trouble, it's what I've been waiting for. I see. I went to the residence of Crown Prince earlier for another matter. Now, it's because of what the third prince did some time ago. He forcefully recruited a few crippled generals from the military to build a hall of the handicapped in his residence. The external purpose is to show his benevolence of comforting the disabled soldiers and rescuing the families of those in distress. Objectively speaking, it's a good thing. Even if he has ulterior motives, I'll turn a blind eye as long as he's willing to fork out gold and silver to carry out these things. I won't force everyone to be truly benevolent and ask for nothing in return. However, after he built the Hall of the Handicapped and gained fame, he didn't fulfill any of his promises. He even used the name of the disabled soldiers to deceive the Board of War, trying to gain the favor and support of the military bosses with all sorts of flowery words. Shangguan Lingxiu asked in confusion, which one of the bosses is muddle-headed? He wants to use the name to gather his forces without doing anything. How can he hide it from them? Yunyang chuckled humorlessly. The third prince isn't a fool either. He already has a countermeasure. In fact, he did fork out a lot of silver taels to carry out relief work, but the main reason why I say that he didn't fork out any silver taels is that before the relief work, he first sent men to rob the families of the disabled soldiers. Of course, the robbery was made up to look like it was done by gangsters. Then, he sent men to deliver silver taels to the poor. Naturally, they would be grateful, even more grateful. Shangguan Lingxiu was so angry that she could barely breathe. Her eyes were wide open. There's actually such a thing? I didn't expect the third prince to be so insane. There's really such a thing. Yunyang sighed as well. A prince wants to build a memorial but is reluctant to spend money. Of course, I can't stand it. If I can't stand it, I'll beat it up. Chapter 633. Isn't it disappointing for a prince of a nation to engage in such petty acts? I have 2 goals today. One is to walk around the crown prince's residence and do something, the other is to get rid of all of the third prince's lackeys. Yunyang grinned. Snatching a room is just to discuss them first. This is just the beginning, just the beginning. The main course hasn't been served yet. Come, let's drink. Our priority now is to drink and talk. Everything else will come later. Shangguan Lingxiu smiled sweetly, thinking to herself, I was right. He really has an ulterior motive. How could the almighty supreme cloud fool around like this? It's only reasonable that there's a deeper meaning behind this. Picking up the bowl of wine, he took a big gulp and said softly, if possible, it would be best to beat this third prince to the point that he no longer has any intention of coveting the throne. Get rid of all the people that he relies on, once and for all, and there will be no future troubles. Yunyang chuckled dryly. Of course I want to do that, once and for all, without any future troubles. It's a pity that it can't be done. We don't only have this prince. We must beat him up this time and we must beat him hard enough, but we must preserve a portion of his strength so that he can't stir up any more trouble, but he still hasn't given up on his evil intentions. I still want to keep him as a qualified whetstone. Wouldn't it be a waste of space to make use of him if we beat him to death? Including the crown prince and the fourth prince, as well as the few princes who have yet to grow up but are already ambitious. All of them are useful whetstones. If we don't make the best use of them, wouldn't we be letting them off too easily? The royal family provides them with luxurious clothes and luxurious food, with such great authority, but they don't even get anything in return. Aren't they not human beings? Shangguan Lingxiu could not help but burst out laughing. Yunyang's words sounded ludicrous, but there was a deeper meaning in them. Shangguan Lingxiu could hear it clearly. It was not supposed to be funny, but when Yunyang spoke, he winked at her, intentionally or unintentionally. It was so funny that she could not help but break into a smile. Actually, I have another matter to discuss with you today. Shangguan Lingxiu's gaze fell on Yunyang's face. She wanted to say something but hesitated. The emotion that flashed across her eyes was forcefully suppressed. Speak your mind. Hemming and hawing isn't your style, Sister Lingxiu, said Yun-yang. Old Great Mistress. There was sorrow in Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes. Old Great Mistress has been mentally and physically supporting the family of generals all these years. She's at the end of her life now. I don't want her to pass away just like this, but I can't find a way to prolong her life. Yun-yang was silent for a moment. His lifespan was nearing its end. This was a person's destiny, a destiny that was difficult to change. Even someone as strong as Feng Xiange, who had friends like Yun-yang, Supreme Cloud, Dugu Chou, Ling Xiaozue, and Heaven's Inquisition, it was difficult for him to come up with a solution to such a situation where his time was almost up. What good idea could Shangguan Lingxiu have? Defying the heavens and changing one's fate was never an easy task. Shangguan Lingxiu's heart sank when she saw Yun-yang's silence. Her eyes were rimmed with tears as she spoke in a trembling voice, I know. I know that old Grand Commandant Feng has already exhausted his lifespan. His condition is even worse than old mistress's. It was you who kept him alive, so I want to, please help. Her eyes were focused on Yun-yang's face, almost pleading. Yun-yang thought about it and explained softly, Sister Lingxiu, it's not that I'm trying to shirk this responsibility. It's because old mistress, old Grand Commandant Feng, and old Marshal Chiu are in different states. The two old generals are in a precarious state, mainly because they've expended a large amount of qi and blood in the battlefield in the past. Now that both of their qi and blood are depleted, it's difficult for them to continue. As for my cultivation method, it's best to regenerate qi and blood. I've filled the two old sirs' bodies with my basic qi to avert the crisis. Most importantly, the two old sirs aren't really at the end of their lifespan. That's why I've been able to extend their lives for a period of time. It doesn't mean that I can reverse the flow of life and death and extend their lifespan. However, the matriarch's condition is not like this. From what I know, although the matriarch is skilled in martial arts, she rarely goes to war, and her body does not have many injuries. However, over the years, the grievous news of her parents, husband, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, people dying on the battlefield continuously spread, causing the matriarch to suffer too many mental blows. Ordinary people who are injured only expend their qi and blood, but for the matriarch, she expends her heart and blood. Old mistress's heart and soul have really been drained. Yun-yang sighed and said, in fact, I've checked on old mistress's physical condition many times when I went to the residence of Shangguan previously. However, since Sister Lingxiu has spoken this time, I'll go again no matter what and try my best. I dare not guarantee whether it'll be effective or how effective it will be. Shangguan Lingxiu was delighted. As long as you're willing to go, everything will be fine. Both of them had settled the matter. Shangguan Lingxiu was overjoyed and began to urge Yun-yang to drink. It was as if in her heart, there was nothing that could not be done as long as Yun-yang went. Supreme Cloud, the Nine Supremes think tank, was already a god in the hearts of Yutong's people. He was omnipotent and Shangguan Lingxiu knew too well how capable Yun-yang was. Naturally, she had high hopes. Yun-yang chuckled bitterly. If he could reconnect with Emmy now, old mistress's matter would not be a big deal. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he could settle it with a wave of his hand. The problem now, however, was that he had yet to recover. If he were to rely on the endless divine art to comb through the meridians, it would only be like what Yun-yang had said just now. At most, he could only delay it for a period of time. When the endless spiritual qi that had been infused into her body was exhausted, it would be the end of it. Furthermore, although such a method could be used repeatedly, the effect would be worse each time and the duration would be shorter. Yun-yang could not stay in the residence of Shangguan all the time. This was the crux of the matter. At this moment, footsteps could be heard coming from outside. Someone was walking up the stairs, walking towards them unhurriedly. From the sound of the footsteps, there were only 3 people. Yunyang glanced at Shengguan Lingxiu. Both of them did not speak and waited quietly for the arrival of the person. Dong, 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 someone knocked on the door. A voice that was as gentle as the spring breeze, tinged with a hint of laughter, rang from outside. "Is it young Master Yun inside? This humble king has come to meet you." It was the 3rd prince. A cold smirk hung on the corners of Yun Yang's lips as he spoke lazily. "3rd prince is here. Do you want me to get out of here? If you have the intention, why don't you come in and give it a try?" The carefree laughter outside did not stop as the door opened. The 3rd prince walked in leisurely and said with a hearty laugh, "How would this humble king dare to let brother Yun out of here? It's just that we haven't seen each other for a long time, so I've come to have a drink with brother Yun. What do you think?" The 3rd prince thought that he was already very approachable and courteous. He even believed that even if Yun Yang did not have a good impression of him, it was still possible for him to sit down and have a chat or have a glass of wine since he had said so. One should not slap a smiling person. This was how it had always been since ancient times. As long as he was allowed to sit down, it would not be difficult for him to get closer to Yun Yang and even establish a relationship. All he needed was a starting point. As long as he could achieve this goal, what was the big deal if a few of his subordinates were humiliated? Even if Yun Yang killed a few of them, it would not be a big deal. This was a relationship with the carefree king, who was extremely popular at the moment. Actually, Shengguan Lingxiu's request was not about this, but I went to the toilet and couldn't remember what I wanted to write when I came back. The speechlessness was depressing. Chapter 634. Who did not know that King Xiaoyao was the most powerful man in the imperial court and was the emperor's most trusted and valued person? Yun Yang, on the other hand, was King Xiaoyao's only son. As long as Yun Yang supported him, he would be able to gain King Xiaoyao's goodwill. By then, King Xiaoyao only needed to say a word of help in front of his father and the crown prince's position would no longer be an unattainable dream. Yun Yang looked at the 2 men behind the 3rd prince, a murderous intent flashing across his eyes as he said faintly, "Of course, your highness can meet me, but there's no need for a drink." The 3rd prince was shocked. As a prince, he had come with a humble attitude and was not even allowed to drink? Yun Yang said with a faint smile, "Firstly, my wine is very expensive. Your highness might not be able to afford it. Secondly, I only drink with my friends. Coincidentally, your highness is not my friend. Not in the past, not now, and not in the future." The harshness of his words had reached a whole new level. The 3rd prince's expression immediately changed and became very unsightly. The 2 men behind him were enraged as well as they hollered, "Yun Yang! How dare you? How dare you be so rude to his highness?" The 3rd prince waved his hand to stop the 2 men before he said coldly, "Oh. So young Master Yun's wine is actually this unpleasant. Although I don't know much about young Master Yun and can't be considered friends, I wonder what other wine in the Empire of Yutong can young Master Yun afford to drink but I can't." These words were obviously filled with malicious intent, and he wanted to give Yun Yang something to use against him. The entire Empire of Yutong belonged to Yutong's royalty, not to mention that Yutong had broken the 4-nation siege and its reputation had soared. As long as Yun Yang answered carelessly and belittled the royalty's dignity, he would not be able to escape the crime of insubordination. Yun Yang rolled his eyes and chuckled. "Your Highness, there are many good things in this world. Not only are there many that you've never seen, there are also many that you'll never be able to possess in this lifetime. Although those are indeed good things." The 3rd prince sucked in a deep breath and glared at Yun Yang. "Yun Yang, what do you mean? Why don't you make it clearer?" Yun Yang said faintly, "Take my wine for example, you really can't afford to drink it, much less accept it. However, although you can't afford to drink this wine, you still have a very big advantage. The third prince sneered, oh. I can't believe that I actually have an advantage in young Master Yun's eyes. Yunyang nodded seriously and said with a smile, no one will be nothing, the same goes for your highness. Your highness has done well in raising dogs. I admit my inferiority, I won't be able to compare to you in this lifetime. Raising a dog? The third prince snorted and narrowed his eyes. What are you trying to say? The faces of the two people behind him had already turned red. His eyes flashed with malice. Yunyang stood up slowly, looking at the two men behind the third prince and said faintly, am I not clear enough? Third prince, don't you see the two ferocious dogs behind you? Raising such audacious dogs is rare, even if they don't look down on their peers. These two men had stood up to accuse Yunyang, but he had ignored them. He had only caught them now. The two men behind the third prince were the planners and executors of the third prince's plan to help the poor and needy. Even the so-called gangsters and bandits were all directed by these two men. One was the planner, the other the executor. These two men were the culprits. Yunyang's main purpose of coming to the Redolent Inn was to settle scores with these two men, aside from the third prince. Not only did he want to kill them quickly, he wanted to do it in front of the third prince. This was Yunyang's insistence, unwavering. The middle-aged man with fair skin and no beard was already trembling with rage. He gritted his teeth and said, Yunyang, you think that you're King Yun's son. You're such a bully. Do you know that justice is not something that can be changed by force? Yunyang smiled faintly but ignored him. Instead, he continued where he left off earlier, looking at the third prince and said, Your Highness, do you know what kind of dog would be so audacious as to bare its fangs and brandish its claws, barking everywhere without waiting for its owner to speak? The veins on the third prince's forehead were throbbing, his eyes bloodshot. He had never expected that he would come forward magnanimously and show goodwill after his men were bullied by Yunyang, hoping to forge a good relationship and bury the hatchet. In the end, Yunyang did not play by the script. Not only did he not give him any face, he had even scolded him without restraint. His mouth was red and his teeth were white as he slapped his face. This was simply slapping him in the face, slapping him again and again. There was no mercy, no room for negotiation. Without a doubt, only a rabid dog would be so bold as to bark everywhere. Yunyang said seriously, only a rabid dog would dare to bite anyone. Even when facing a tiger, it dares to charge forward and bark a few times, because it has no fear. However, the risk of raising a rabid dog like this is too great. It might bite itself to death at any time. Yunyang did not even look at the two men who were extremely humiliated. Instead, he looked at the third prince and said softly and gently, a rabid dog like this should be killed as soon as possible. Third prince, I'm thinking for your sake. Good words are unpleasant to the ears, but they're beneficial to your actions. Behind the third prince, the bearded man's eyes were gleaming with a bloodlust as he panted and roared, Yunyang, a warrior can be killed but not humiliated. You. Yunyang turned his head abruptly and said eerily, a warrior can be killed? Is that true? The burly man only felt a fiendish aura of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood rushing towards him. For a moment, he even held his breath. A kind of extreme fear instantly filled his heart. He could not help but take a step back. His soul was about to leave his body, and he directly stopped speaking. Poof! Yunyang took a step forward, his footsteps pounding on the two men's hearts like a sledgehammer. He said faintly, a warrior can be killed. Not bad at all. Suddenly, a hand shot out like lightning and grabbed the bearded man's neck. He said faintly, no wonder you dare to bark in front of me. You have a heaven realm cultivation base. Not bad at all. He retracted his arm, grabbed the man by the neck and brought him in front of him. He said gently, you said it yourself. A man can be killed. I respect your decision. I won't scold you, I'll just kill you. Before his words echoed in the air, the bearded man's head disappeared from where Yun Yang's palm had passed. What was left in front of him was a headless corpse. Yun Yang's palm had actually slammed the man's head into his chest. The soft cracking sound was the sound of the man's vertebrae shattering. The headless body of the man swayed and fell to the ground with a thud, but there was no trace of blood. Extreme fear flashed in the middle-aged man's eyes as he turned to leave. Yun Yang chuckled and said, "He said it. A warrior can be killed. Two came together, how can one leave alone?" Then, he kicked out. There was a distance of 10 feet between them, but the kick landed squarely on the man's back. The man shrieked, jumping on the spot like he was possessed. Then, he collapsed to the ground like a pile of mud, no longer breathing. The third prince's breath caught in his throat. His eyes bulged as he looked at Yun Yang and lowered his head to look at the two corpses. Then, he lifted his head to look at Yun Yang again. A sliver of fear finally seeped through his incredulous gaze. His face was pale, his body trembling uncontrollably as he said in a quivering voice, Yun Yang. You dare, kill people in public. Yun Yang asked warmly, "Your Highness, do you know why I killed them?" The third prince gritted his teeth hatefully and said, "You're lawless, disregarding the law and deceiving your superiors. You wait." Yun Yang smiled coldly and said, all right, I shall wait. Your Highness, go back to the palace and lodge a complaint. I believe you'll know why I killed them." He lifted his head to look at the third prince's face. Extending his hand, he patted the third prince's shoulder and said softly, "You're still young, there are some things." Yun Yang's hand stopped in midair. This was because he could clearly see that there was a puddle of water beneath the third prince's feet, and it seemed to be continuously expanding. At the same time, an inexplicable stench permeated the air. When he extended his hand, the third prince thought that Yun Yang was going to kill him and peed his pants. Chapter 635. Shengguan Lingxiu, who was behind Yun Yang, could not help but wear an inexplicable expression. As a prince, he had behaved in such a pathetic manner. Not only did he not step forward in the face of danger, he had even wet his pants. His courage alone did not match his status. Furthermore, he had wet his pants when he knew very well that Yun Yang would never kill him. Such a performance could no longer be described as unbearable. It was simply a cowardly bandit, a group of rascals. Yet, such a person had coveted the position of crown prince and ascended to the throne. If such a person were to become the emperor, it would truly be a tragedy for Yutong's people. Not only was Shengguan Lingxiu unwilling to see such an outcome, she was determined to put an end to it. She would not allow the fruits of her family's hard work, which had been bathed in blood, to be defiled and desecrated by the person before her. At this moment, Shengguan Lingxiu had made up her mind. She was determined to stand firm. At this time, the third prince's subordinates had also come up from downstairs, obviously having heard the commotion. However, when they saw the two corpses on the ground and the third prince's pale face, they were all dumbfounded and did not move at all. No one would have thought that Yun Yang would be so bold as to kill the third prince's two aides in public. Such an act was no different from rebellion. Yun Yang could not help frowning as he watched the group come up. He had vaguely felt a dangerous aura just now, but the third prince and his men did not have that kind of aura. What was going on? The group swarmed forward and shielded the third prince behind them. The person who had been chased away by Yun Yang snorted coldly, "Yun Yang, you must know that there is a limit to everything. You've gone too far today. Someone will settle the score with you." Protected by the group, the third prince felt that his safety was assured and finally regained some color. However, when he looked at Yun Yang again, his gaze was still tinged with fear. However, he could not afford to show weakness at this juncture, so he braced himself and said, "Yun Yang, just you wait." Before the third prince's words echoed in the air, Shangguan Lingxiu's soft sigh came from behind Yun Yang. "Your Highness, it's better that you go back quickly. Arguing like this is just exposing your own disgrace. Can there really be any outcome?" The third prince's gaze swept past Yun Yang and focused on Shangguan Lingxiu's pretty face, his gaze laced with deep resentment. To him, or perhaps from what he knew and felt, even if he were to complain to his father, Yun Yang would most probably not be punished. It was even possible that his father already knew what he had done. He was waiting for him to come knocking on his door. If that was the case, the best outcome would be for him to be scolded. Speaking of which, the third prince was rather quick-witted. Despite his bravado, he actually wanted Yun Yang to deal with him a few more times. It would be best if he was slightly injured. Yun Yang would not be able to kill or severely injure him anyway. If he was injured, he would become the victim and the situation would turn around accordingly. At least, he would have an additional argument when he went to the Emperor of Yutang. At the very least, his father would not punish him further considering that he was injured. However, Shangguan Lingxiu's words had put him in a difficult position. There was no room for him to use his quick-wittedness. It was one thing for the third prince to know that he could not afford to offend Yun Yang, but Shangguan Lingxiu did not have what he needed to be wary of. Naturally, he placed all his resentment on Shangguan Lingxiu, who had been watching from the sidelines. "I can't afford to offend Yun Yang, but you, Shangguan Lingxiu, have seen my disgrace from the beginning. I dare not target Yun Yang, but do you think I dare not retaliate against you? Shangguan Lingxiu." The third prince uttered word by word, "It's you." When he said this, the third prince's eyes turned blue. Yun Yang and Shangguan Lingxiu, who were directly involved, were dumbfounded. Yun Yang and the third prince's entourage had been involved from the beginning to the end. What did it have to do with Shangguan Lingxiu? Why did he suddenly make a turn? Was this a sudden turn of events? I was wondering. I have never had any enmity with King Yun's crown prince. Why are you suddenly targeting me? Gu Shenwei said. The third prince grinned hatefully and said, "Shangguan Lingxiu, it was you who went to the crown prince's residence to wait for Yun Yang today and came here. Your ultimate goal was to let Yun Yang go against me. Am I right? So it was you who interfered." The third prince finally understood. Shangguan Lingxiu looked at the third prince in disbelief. How could this work? Was this some sort of reason? Was it reasonable? What was this fellow's brain made of? The third prince cried out angrily, "Yes, I've sent someone to the Shangguan family of generals to ask for your hand in marriage. Am I not worthy of you with my status? What do you mean by doing this now? Ask for my hand in marriage?" The bewilderment in Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes turned into confusion. She had never heard of a marriage proposal. Yun Yang narrowed his eyes at once, the anger that he had initially been feeling intensifying. Ask for my hand in marriage? How could there be such a thing? What a fool's dream, a toad lusting after a swan's flesh, he deserved to die. The third prince's emotions seemed to have been ignited by his own words. Spittle flew everywhere in his rage, his face flushed. "You've already rejected me. Why do you still humiliate me like this? You've asked Yun Yang to go against me. What is your motive? What is your motive?" He bellowed, venting his anger. "You've killed my subordinates, weakened my forces, and humiliated me to this extent. Do you want me to never be able to rise again?" He bellowed, his expression menacing. He had no idea what he was talking about now, nor did he know what his real motive was. This was the extreme rage born from the extreme humiliation that came after the extreme fear and the realization of his extreme embarrassment. His rationality had completely lost its balance because of Shangguan Lingxiu's words. The string in his mind had completely snapped after such a drastic rise and fall. Shangguan Lingxiu frowned and said with slight disgust, "Your Highness, I think you've misunderstood. What I said just now was out of goodwill. I don't want to escalate the conflict between both parties. I have no other intentions." "I've misunderstood? Goodwill?" The third prince chuckled. His gaze was frivolous as he looked at Shangguan Lingxiu and said coldly, "Shangguan Lingxiu, don't think that you're so noble, that you're so unattainable. You can reject me, you can reject any man, but," his tone was heavy as he continued viciously, "but there will come a day when you'll lie on a man's body and be toyed with. This is your fate as a woman. No matter how noble you are, you won't be able to escape from being fucked. Bastard!" Bang! Yunyang could not take it anymore. He kicked the third prince's abdomen without any fuss. Chapter 636. Yunyang's anger had yet to dissipate as he swung his arms. Bang, bang, bang. Dozens of wine jars smashed onto the third prince's head and body. Cries of agony filled the air as blood splattered everywhere. Shangguan Lingxiu's expression and gaze were icy as well. Her bright eyes stared quietly at the utterly disgusting prince as she spoke softly but clearly, "Whether such a day will come or not, at least, that person will never be you." She then turned and returned to her room. She sat down with her back facing the door, not moving an inch. She did not want to look at the third prince anymore, not even once. This person made her feel that even a glance at him would be an insult to her eyes. Extremely filthy. Take him and scram. Immediately. Immediately. Quickly. Bang! Yunyang tossed the last wine jar, cracking it precisely on the third prince's bloodied head. His murderous aura was still thick as he uttered word by word, "If I see him again, he'll die here. Not even the Emperor of Heaven will spare him." The murderous aura around him was almost tangible. Everyone could clearly tell that he was not just boasting. In fact, just by looking at the third prince's wretched state, one could tell that Yunyang was definitely capable of doing it. If he dared to injure him, he dared to kill him. What was there to say? In addition, if the third prince was not treated, he might die here even without Yunyang doing anything. Before he could turn around, there was a loud bang. Yunyang had already slammed the door shut. The third prince's subordinates looked at each other in fear. If the third prince were to die here, however, before anyone could make a move, suddenly, just as Yunyang closed the door, suddenly, swoosh, 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 countless sounds of air being sliced could be heard. A series of cries came from outside the door. Thud, thud, thud. It was the sound of hidden weapons being inserted into the door. Swoosh, 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 just as the door was closed, rays of sharp light flashed. Countless sharp hidden weapons landed on the door like a downpour. The tips of the hidden weapons that were still exposed were glimmering with a blue glow. It was obvious that all the hidden weapons were laced with lethal poison. Yunyang frowned. He instantly judged that someone wanted to kill him. As for those people outside, 99% of them were already dead. However, those people were merely caught in the crossfire. The killer's target is definitely me. Just by looking at the angle, it was clear that it was coming for him. The reason he missed was probably because he had angrily closed the door. The timing was too coincidental, and he was lucky enough to avoid the wave of hidden weapons, leaving all of them on the door. As expected of the Redolent Lodge, this wooden door is actually made of ironwood. The quality is not bad indeed. Listening to the continuous knocking sounds, the corners of Yunyang's lips curled into an inexplicable smile. In reality, he was a little surprised and even afraid. That wave of hidden weapons attack just now could be said to be very clever. Before it happened, he actually only felt a sense of danger, and then it disappeared. He didn't even sense any murderous aura. If he had not closed the door and used it to defend against the hidden weapon's attack, Yun-yang estimated that he might not have died, or even suffered a serious injury. However, a certain degree of injury was unavoidable. This was also due to the miraculous effect of the endless divine art, which made him immune to all poisons in the world. In other words, this wave of hidden weapons attack was so sudden that it was enough to kill more than 95% of the cultivators in this world. Another problem arose. Assassins who could hide their murderous aura before they attacked had to be top-notch existences. Then, who would want to kill him when all the assassin organizations were occupied with their own matters? Poof! The ironwood door that had withstood a few rounds of hidden weapons and had given Yun-yang a considerable amount of buffer time suddenly shattered. A meteor hammer that was about the size of a human head charged in like a meteorite, heading straight for Yun-yang's head. If they were to collide head-on, it would definitely be like 10,000 peach blossoms blossoming, neither side satisfied. Yun-yang's reflexes were miraculous as he struck out with his palm. With a loud boom, the meteor hammer was sent flying backward, even further than when it had struck. After Yun-yang's successful strike, his right hand was already pulling Shengguan Lingxiu along. Like a fish in the sea, they broke through the window and escaped swiftly. With a loud explosion, wood splinters flew everywhere, and the two of them were already outside. Just as both of them left the room on the top floor of the Inn of Drunken Fragrance, countless hidden weapons rained down on the entire number 1 sky hall like a storm. If Yun-yang and Shengguan Lingxiu had hesitated, they would have been drowned by the rain of hidden weapons. Just as Yun-yang leaped out of the window, he could already see saber light flashing, coming at him from both sides. Yun-yang, who was in midair, exhaled as 2 rays of saber light shot out from his sleeves. Yun-yang's saber was only a saber made of refined steel, but his saber skill was saber truth, destiny blade. The saber on the left was like a dragon emerging from the sea while the saber on the right was like a soaring dragon in the sky. Clang! Clang! Amidst the two clashes, Yun-yang wrapped an arm around Shengguan Lingxiu's slender frame. Both of them spun in the air as if they were one, successfully dispersing the 2 saber lights. They then cast the omnipresent net to protect themselves before they landed on the bustling street. It was as if a silver ball of light weaved from the dazzling saber light had descended upon the world. Boom! The roof of the No. 1 sky hall suddenly collapsed as 7 to 8 silhouettes dressed in black appeared on the roof. The moment they appeared, 2 of them had already drawn their deicide bows. Almost at the same time, 2 beams of light flew towards Yun-yang as if they had broken through the limits of time and space. As for the other 5 to 6 people, they raised their arms at the same frequency. Rays of dark light flew towards Yun-yang like bolts of lightning. Sabers, swords, spears, and other weapons appeared in unison, obviously the weapons that these people were familiar with. At such a distance, the lethal force of the flying needles, flying daggers, and other hidden weapons was no longer enough to kill the enemy. Thus, they might as well toss the heavier weapons to facilitate the ambush. After the weapons were tossed out, the 7 to 8 people did not hesitate as they sprung up and pounced forward. It was obvious that they were afraid that such an attack would not be able to kill Yun-yang, so they intended to join forces to kill him. At the same time, 3 masked men in black appeared on the roof opposite the redolent inn. Each of them held a deicide bow in their hands as they pulled the bowstrings without hesitation. After the 3 beams of cold light, another 3 followed, and another 3. It was the deicide bow's continuous firing of arrows. They were separated into different levels and waves, flying towards Yun-yang who was dealing with the locust-like weapons. At this point, the killing trap could already be said to be extremely tight. Looking at the entire profound sky continent, the number of practitioners who could safely escape from such a tight killing trap could be counted on one's fingers. However, the ambushing assassins' actions still had not ended, and were still continuing. Chapter 637. On the ground. A few masked men dressed in black, of varying numbers, were launching an ambush at the spot where Yun Yang was about to land in the middle. The ambushers had no qualms, barging straight in, causing the ordinary people on the street to be sent flying. In spite of this, they did not care at all. In their eyes, Yun Yang was their only target. Anyone who stood in their way was only an obstacle, their deaths were not to be regretted. The murderous intent was unprecedentedly thick, condensing, converging, and surging. In the sky, on the ground, in the air, countless assassins targeted at Yun Yang from all directions had truly formed a three-dimensional net with no blind spots. In addition, the ambushers were all top-notch assassins, experts with extraordinary cultivation base. Yun Yang, who was in a precarious situation, was unprecedentedly focused. He held Shengguan Lingxiu with one hand while the other gripped the well-tempered steel saber tightly. Bam, 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 the saber in his hand was constantly changing its trajectory, slashing, flicking, sticking, blocking, deflecting, all the incoming weapons and arrows were shot down without missing a single one. At the same time, his body was constantly changing its direction along with the weapons that came at him from the sky. He kept evading the attacks and leveraging on them. He was still thinking, who is it? Who is it? As he spun, he caught a glimpse of room number 1, which had long been penetrated from the north to the south. The third prince's followers and guards had all died there, not a single one was spared. Although Yun Yang had the intention to kill them due to their evil deeds, he did not intend to do it immediately. He did not expect them to be dead until the moment he did it himself. He did not know if this was a good cycle of reincarnation and who would be spared by the heavens. However, this whetstone could be considered useless from now on. After today's events, the third prince would be lucky if he didn't go crazy or become handicapped, not to mention sharpening his saber. Yun Yang heaved a sigh of regret. I really didn't want to cripple you. I really wanted to preserve your strength, but your luck. At this moment, a heart-wrenching howl that sounded like it was about to cry rang out, Quick, save His Highness the Third Prince quickly. Quick. Quick. Reporting officer. Young Master Yun is under attack. Quick, quick, quick. That voice came from the manager of the Drifting Fragrance Pavilion. The fat shopkeeper felt like he was about to die. He felt as if the sky had collapsed on top of his head. His entire body, including his heart, was freezing cold. After this unforeseen event, no matter what, the Drifting Fragrance House was destined to be finished. When Yun Yang had brutally killed the third prince's followers, although it was somewhat of a hindrance, there was a reason for it. Spectators like them would at most have to pay a fine after the event, nothing more, when it came to a fight between deities and high-level officials. But what happened next was too horrifying. It directly turned into a murder in the Jianghu. First, all of the third prince's attendants and guards, more than 10 of them, had died here. Although the third prince's life and death were still unknown, even if he was not dead, he was already on the verge of death. It was not optimistic at all that he would be able to hold on until the end of this incident. At the same time, King Xiaoyao's crown prince, Yun Yang, was besieged by many assassins from all directions. He was at an absolute disadvantage, and the atmosphere of being surrounded and assassinated made the situation even more dire. One was the emperor's son. The other was King Xiaoyao's son. If either of these two were to die here, not only the shopkeeper, but his entire family would be finished as well. The Drifting Fragrance Pavilion. Compared to the annihilation of an entire family, this pavilion was only a small matter. Annihilating 9 families was never just an adjective. Oh my God! Why am I so unlucky? The shopkeeper was bitter, so anxious that he was about to hang himself. However, he dared not die even if he wanted to. He had to face this mess, hoping for a fluke, hoping for the slightest chance. In midair, a purple light shone. Yun-yang let out a long howl, his entire body spinning rapidly like a top. Saber light shot out with him, slicing the two masked men in black into minced meat wherever the saber light passed. Countless rays of light were gathering towards the spot where Yun-yang was about to land, waiting for the moment he landed to be subjected to the innumerable attacks. However, Yun-yang did not land as the assassins had expected. Instead, he slashed the ground with his saber first. The recoil from the saber jolted him up from the ground. As his purple robe fluttered, he was like a bolt of purple lightning, charging towards the top of a wall in the nick of time. With a loud bang, a masked man in black who was on top of the wall was thrown off the wall by Yun-yang's forceful slash. The masked man, who had yet to land, spat out a mouthful of blood, mixed with pieces of his internal organs. It was obvious that he was no longer alive. The moment the saber energy collided, the other party's internal organs had already been destroyed. Even his deific consciousness and soul had been completely shattered. Yun-yang had already used 120% of his strength in this strike in order to gain a foothold. Even though he had broken through the ambush in a stunning manner and succeeded in one strike, the head-on clash that was not fanciful at all still caused Yun-yang to stagger and sway a little. For beams of light shot towards Yun-yang who had yet to regain his footing, the killing intent did not slow down at all. With a flip of his body, Yun-yang had already brought Shengguan Lingxiu down from the top of the wall, avoiding the pursuit of the four beams of light. Once he landed, Yun-yang panted heavily, his face pale. Large beads of sweat seeped from his forehead. He was in a terrible state, far from the calm and stunning demeanor he had displayed earlier. Yun-yang had not expected this wave of ambushing assassins to be so valiant. A few of them were supremely high-level cultivators in the ninth heaven realm. The leader had yet to show himself, so he must be even stronger. The assassin who had been killed by Yun-yang just now had a cultivation base of 8th heaven pinnacle. Where did these fellows come from? Yun-yang had truly not expected this to happen. It was a huge surprise to him. Since the appearance of the dictum of death, Yun-yang had already anticipated the gathering of top-notch assassins in Tiantang City. In fact, Yun-yang had basically all the martial artists who had entered Tiantang City during this period of time. Even the area of each person's activity was clearly recorded. His men were watching over every corner. Yun-yang did not feel the slightest bit guilty about being the local boss of Tiantang City, he had the capital to back it up. In spite of this, he did not have the slightest bit of information about these masked men in black who had suddenly appeared. Chapter 638. Where are these people from? Which force do they belong to? Yun-yang was puzzled as he continued to speculate. Throughout the entire ambush, Shengguan Lingxiu had been carried by Yun-yang, flying around, leaping down from the building, fighting in the air, rushing to the top of the wall, and finally landing from the top of the wall. She even caught a glimpse of Yun-yang's unusual expression when she landed steadily. Shengguan Lingxiu had only said one thing throughout the entire process: both of you, go to the residence of Yun and report the news. Faced with such a high level of battle, it would only be suicide for her two guards to join in. They would only be a burden and would not be of any help at all. It was better for them to report the news. For the rest of the time that followed, she only did one thing: to calm her mind, cultivate, lift her qi, and lighten her body. She reduced the weight of her body as much as possible, moving with Yun-yang, turning her body into a blade of grass, a cloud. She moved however Yun-yang asked her to. She did not want to cause any trouble for Yun-yang, nor did she make any noise. She did not say anything like, "Put me down, go on your own," or "Don't mind me," or anything of the sort. She knew very well that those were nonsense. If she had uttered one more sentence like that, just one word, it could have caused Yun-yang's attention to shift to her. Just this point alone could lead to the worst possible outcome. If that happened, not only would Yun Yang not let go of her, it would be an insult to a strong practitioner like Yun Yang. It would make the situation even more dire. Throughout the entire process, she had only tried her best to make her body lighter. She tried her best not to add any additional burden to Yun Yang's body. Swoosh, 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 a few black silhouettes gave chase once more, followed by a series of black silhouettes. There were a total of 11 of them, surrounding Yun Yang and Shengguan Lingxiu from all directions. Before the encirclement could be completed, Yun Yang charged out at the cost of expending his basic qi. Saber Truth, Destiny Blades 2 styles and 4 styles were executed with all his might, charging out like a raging dragon with a radiant glow. The other party had yet to regain their footing. This was the best timing. 2 cries of agony could be heard as the 2 men were sliced into pieces by Yun Yang. Just as Yun Yang was about to dash out, a ray of light descended from the sky. With a swoosh, a sword light that was as dazzling as the Milky Way appeared in front of Yun Yang. If Yun Yang barged in forcefully, he would only crash into the web of swords. Yun Yang sheathed his saber and swept it around to protect himself as he retreated. The silhouette came crashing down. Seizing the opportunity when Yun Yang was retreating, he launched a series of ferocious attacks. Yun Yang hollered, slashing with his saber. Dang dang dang. After a dozen or so deafening collisions, both sides let out muffled groans and retreated. A masked man in black landed in front of him. Obviously, this person was the leader who had yet to appear. Yun Yang held his saber horizontally and looked at his opponent coldly, secretly channeling his energy to regulate his breathing. You live up to your reputation. Young Master Yun, you live up to your reputation indeed. How remarkable. The leader of the masked men in black said in a hoarse voice, his eyes flashing with resentment. The other party had sent a total of 16 brothers in this operation to ambush Yun Yang. At first, they had thought that it was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife, it should have been a piece of cake. Unexpectedly, just as they had forced the other party down from the upper floor, 5 of them had already died. This young Master Yun was actually such a tough character. His ability was strong, his reflexes were quick, and his murderous nature was far beyond their expectations. Yun Yang only snorted softly and did not retort. Right now, he was cultivating with all his might, the endless divine art operating at full speed. He could clearly feel the mystical qi in his dantian gradually recovering, the rapid recovery of his depleted energy. How could he be bothered with the masked man in black's words? Instead, he released the rapidly circulating energy. The man, who had fought Yun Yang head-on earlier, was also short of breath under Yun Yang's forceful counterattack. Using his words, he took in a few breaths and allowed his subordinates to catch their breaths before setting up their formation to prepare for the next round of siege. However, seeing Yun Yang's reaction, he knew that he could not delay any longer. With a wave of his hand, he ordered, "Everyone, let's send young Master Yun on his way." Before his words echoed in the air, the 10 men around him launched a pincer attack at the same time. Instead, the masked leader in black stood alone, his gaze flickering with uncertainty. It was obvious that his plan was to force Yun Yang's weakness with the 10 of them surrounding him and kill him with a single strike. There was also the Go manual. It was something that the higher-ups had ordered them to obtain, they could not afford to miss it. Without Yun Yang's instruction, Shengguan Lingxiu retreated 30 feet back and leaned her back against the wall. She had already pulled out a short sword that gleamed coldly in her hand, her bright eyes watching the situation unblinkingly. Under such circumstances, if she insisted on staying by Yun Yang's side, not only would she not be of help, she would only add to his troubles and restraints. Therefore, retreating without hesitation and distancing herself from his surroundings was the best choice right now. Furthermore, with her standing at the foot of the wall, she would have the chance to notice if a strong enemy were to launch an attack from this direction. As long as she noticed it, even if she were to die in the next moment, she could still warn Yun Yang and give him a chance of survival. Yun Yang's purple robe was still fluttering elegantly, the cold gleam in his palms still glinting. An endless amount of heaven and earth's spiritual qi was gathering towards them. There were a total of 11 experts on the other side and 2 of them were Dao realm cultivators. With such a lineup, it would be a piece of cake to kill him. If he had not coincidentally closed the door and bought some time for himself, he would have been in grave danger upstairs and the situation would have been even worse. At this moment, Yun Yang's heart was unusually cold, like ice and snow. Other than the impending massacre, he could not care about anything else. At the juncture of life and death, he channeled the endless divine art with all his might. Pure mystical qi surged endlessly in his meridians. At this critical juncture, the only thing he could rely on was his cultivation method. The endless divine art allowed him to replenish his qi much faster than anyone else. This was his biggest advantage in this battle. His eyes did not pay too much attention to the incoming enemies. Instead, most of his attention was focused on the tip of the saber in his hand. His will was focused, his essence, qi, and spirit were highly integrated. This was the first time Yun Yang had entered such a state since the battle began. In the previous battles, the enemies he had encountered were not of such a high realm. Of course, there were times when he had been through more dangerous situations, but his realm had never reached such heights. At this moment, amidst the terrifying atmosphere of being surrounded by enemies and assassinations, Yun Yang, who was in an extremely disadvantageous situation, had suddenly entered such a state. He could feel that the ground beneath his feet was continuously extending and expanding. His mind was clear and bright, as if the entire world was within his perception. It was an extremely mystical feeling. Chapter 639. At this moment, the shoulder of an enemy who was attacking from the left moved. Yun Yang could tell at once that this person would come first and that his attack would be from above, slashing diagonally. His final landing point would be his waist, thus creating an opportunity to force him into the ambush on the right. Conversely, the one who was actually setting up a lethal attack on him should be the other person behind him, although that person had not moved yet. Yun Yang's saber light flashed, but he was one step ahead, aiming at the right side of his waist and flicking his saber out. Just as the man's saber was about to land, he watched in horror as Yun Yang's saber came at him in a strange manner, coming for his arm. Rather than saying that Yun Yang's saber was coming for him, it would be more accurate to say that he was offering himself up for the slash. That person cried out in alarm and tried his best to withdraw his saber. He floated backwards, but the difference between the two of them had already been determined. How could he retreat unscathed? His right arm inevitably had a cut about half a foot long, and blood spurted out like a fountain. The other person behind him was used to working with him. He was waiting for his comrade to strike and force the target to respond while he would react accordingly. This was a tacit understanding that had been formed between the two of them for a long time, and it had always been successful. Just now, his comrade had struck like he always did. Of course, he had to follow closely behind. However, his comrade's saber was forced back before he could swing it, retreating hastily. As for his own strike, which was supposed to be seamless in coordination, it was now an aimless attack. Faced with Yun Yang's successful strike, his saber that was moving along with the flow was useless as it was completely sealed off by the other party. Not only his sword, but his hand as well. His retreat route had been completely sealed. What was going on? There was no killing intent lying in ambush here. Why did it become a death ambush when he attacked? This was what the assassin felt. Once the thought popped into the assassin's mind, there was nothing else he could think of. All his thoughts were reduced to a scream as his hand, along with his sword, fell to the ground, accompanied by a splatter of blood. Shangguan Lingxiu, who was watching from the side, was filled with incredulity and inexplicable disbelief. What Shangguan Lingxiu saw was that Yun Yang was the first to strike with his saber while the other party, for some unknown reason, sent his arm directly to Yun Yang's blade. Then, the other party let out a more normal cry and retreated. When Yun Yang sheathed his saber, he had only casually lifted the saber and swung it. It was not even the residual force of the previous strike. Yet, it was this casual swing that the other assassin had sent his hand under the swing of the saber. Yun Yang did not seem to have exerted much effort as he swung his saber downwards, chopping off the assassin's right hand. After that, he simply swung his blade sideways, blocking all attacks from other directions to ensure his own safety. Shangguan Lingxiu had witnessed everything that had happened. She could see the entire process clearly, but she was still a little confused. What was going on? Why did it look like the two people who had been struck by the saber had pretended to fight, sending themselves to the edge of the saber? How could they have really cut off their hands if it was a fake fight? Besides, with so many people watching, could it really be that obvious? The pupils of the black-masked leader narrowed as he hollered, "Everyone, step back." The 7 to 8 assassins took 3 steps back in unison, not at all flustered. They were not affected by the setback of their attack. The black-masked man said darkly, "Don't use any more tricks. Break through with brute force. 1 brute force can defeat 10 men. Kill them as soon as possible." Yun Yang was startled, lifting his head to look at the black-masked man and said faintly, "Not bad." The black-masked man snorted, wanting to roll his eyes, but he held himself back. Anyone with a bit of knowledge would be able to guess that you've just learned that skill. Otherwise, you wouldn't have used it in the first wave of ambush. How could we give you the chance to familiarize yourself with it? You're asking for it. So, there's nothing to say about beating them to death. With a wave of his hand, the black-masked leader tossed out thick iron rods along with countless sabers, spears, swords, halberds, axes, hooks, forks, and hammers. Almost everything that one could think of, all of them heavy weaponry. Following that, another 2 sledgehammers appeared in his hands. They were accumulating strength and waiting to be launched, and they seemed to have the momentum of an earth-shattering storm. This fellow actually has a spatial ring with a large amount of heavy weaponry. Yun Yang's expression turned grim. As expected, the situation in the ensuing battle turned grim for Yun Yang. When there was no more tricks involved in the attacks of both parties, one could easily kill the other with skill. Even if the other party's cultivation base was higher than one's, there would not be too many surprises. This situation could also be applied to 2 or even 3 people. However, when faced with a group of people, no matter how skilled one would still be dazzled by the group attack. Facing the ruthless assassins who pounced on him one after another without a care in the world, Yun Yang was filled with helplessness. No matter how skillful he was, no matter how good his judgment was, there was not much meaning to it. The other party was a group of people. The ensuing battle could only be described as barbaric. Shangguan Lingxiu could see it clearly now, Yun Yang was being restrained. His ability to appear and disappear mysteriously and predict the opponent's attack in advance was no longer of much use. There was almost no place for him to use his skills. As for the other party's ferocious attacks, although there were casualties, it would not be fatal in a short period of time. If Yun Yang really wanted to kill one of them, he would have to use all his moves to kill that person. However, once he did so, the other party's desperate attack would definitely come into play, using 1 or 2 of their lives to trade for Yun Yang's overall disadvantage. They might even take Yun Yang's life. This was undoubtedly a good deal for the black-masked leader. In fact, as long as he could kill Yun Yang as soon as possible, even if half of the assassins here were to die, it would be worth it. He would do anything to achieve his goal. Those who wanted to achieve great things did not bother with trifles. What was a mere casualty? Boom! Yun Yang blocked the staff with all his might and deflected the hammer. His thoughts were a jumbled mess. Where did these people come from? If they were not from the Merciless Tower or the Hall of Crimson Blade, it was impossible for them to be from the concourse of the underworld. Then, these people could only be from two places. One was from the Crown Prince's residence, the other from the Four Seasons Tower. How could the Crown Prince's residence possess such combat power? It was obvious that if the Crown Prince had such capability, the current situation would not be as it was now. It would not be difficult for him to force the Crown Prince to abdicate and change the dynasty with these combat forces. A large group of Heaven Realm and even Dao Realm cultivators. Then, the only other source left was the Four Seasons Tower. However, it did not seem right. He had cautiously inquired from Snow, Frost, and Sword and had never heard of the existence of such people. Then, these people should be someone's personal armed force? Recalling that he had just come out of the Crown Prince's residence, these people had come looking for him almost immediately. Could these people be Sir Bai's men? The more Yunyang thought about it, the more he felt that this was the most likely possibility. However, Sir Bai had obviously had a pleasant time playing Go with him just now. Yunyang suddenly thought of something. Chapter 640. In the next moment, he roared, Divine Will reappeared like a saber. The saber light shone brightly, forcing everyone to take at least a step back. Then, he reached into his robe and pulled out a porcelain bottle. He crushed it, and a few medicinal pills flew into his mouth. Yunyang's action was only right, no one could tell if he had any ulterior motives. Facing the siege of many top-notch cultivators whose cultivation base was higher than his, it was a wise move to keep himself in peak condition. Of course, he had to consume the good medicine, so he had to consume it quickly. However, he seemed to have exerted a little too much force in his haste. Therefore, a tattered Go playbook flew out from his robe and landed on the battlefield. The Go playbook seemed to be very old, as if it would shatter with the slightest force. How could it be lucky enough to fall into such a battlefield where the mystical chi was so strong? Just a casual gust of wind was enough to shatter his body and shatter his bones. Yunyang did not care, of course. His only goal was to probe. Furthermore, the original owner of the playbook was not him and he did not really like playing Go. It would be enough if the playbook could trigger an unexpected change here. However, the moment the playbook appeared, the person who was closest to Yunyang and the playbook was about to hit Yunyang with a strike of his staff. However, the impact of the strike would definitely affect the playbook, causing it to deviate inexplicably and miss its target. Yunyang was delighted. Extending his saber from under the falling playbook, he chased after the man. Seeing that the saber was swift and difficult to evade, the person did not fight it head-on. Instead, he took a step back and avoided the strike by a hair's breadth. Under everyone's gaze, the Go playbook tumbled down. Yunyang exclaimed in shock, "My playbook." He then pounced forward as if he was going to grab it and return it to his robe. With a swoosh, a golden blade sliced through the air, and a dazzling sword light suddenly flashed. A sword slashed through the air, and the rolling chess record was picked up by a stick and flew out with a whoosh. The masked man in black who was watching from the sideline sprung up and grabbed the playbook, turning it over before stuffing it into his robe. Yunyang was enraged. "Are you all trash collectors? You even want to snatch a Go manual?" The masked man in black said coldly, "When you're dead, we'll take everything you have." Yunyang said coldly, "Just you wait. I've poisoned the Go manual anyway. You're dead meat if you touch it." Yunyang was spouting nonsense, but he had already made up his mind. These people were indeed Sir Bai's men. Sir Bai's research in the art of chess had exceeded his expectations, but he did not know if it was a good thing or a bad thing. However, it had given rise to a huge change in the situation today. The leader of the men in black sneered, "So young Master Yun likes to poison his personal belongings, huh? What an interesting way to court death." Since young Master Yun likes to court death so much, we shall help young Master Yun on this journey today. Until your soul goes to the netherworld, you are not allowed to do anything else. Following the leader's order, the 10 men on the other side quickly split into 3 groups, attacking in 3 different directions. After a round of attacks from one side, they withdrew immediately and switched to another side to continue the attack. When Yun Yang was done with the first 2 waves of attacks, the third wave came. Even without considering the fact that the leader with the highest cultivation base was glaring from the side, such an attack was lethal enough. Yun Yang was feeling increasingly strained. The least efficient way of fighting was hitting Yun Yang's weak spot. Yun Yang stole a glance at the masked man in black who was glaring at him, feeling more and more that this man was good at judging the situation and deploying his troops. Based on the current situation, if he were to join the siege, he would undoubtedly give Yun Yang more than twice the pressure he was facing now. This was completely predictable. In spite of this, the pressure was not enough to kill Yun Yang immediately. As long as Yun Yang was willing to pay the price, he had too many ways to escape with Shangguan Lingxiu. In spite of this, the leader of the men in black was watching from the sidelines, glaring at them as if he could strike at any time. Instead, it had taken up most of Yun Yang's energy. If he did not handle it well and the man found an opening, his life and death would be decided with a thunderous strike. There would be no turning back. In spite of this, the reality was that no one would ever know when this person would strike. This was the most uncomfortable reality. In the midst of the battle, someone moved closer to Shangguan Lingxiu and swung his saber. Shangguan Lingxiu deflected the attack with her sword, but she could not help but let out a low grunt. The leader of the masked men was enraged. Bastard! There's no need to complicate matters. Focus on Yun Yang, no mistakes. Everyone was dumbfounded when they heard him. It was not difficult for anyone to imagine that as long as they targeted Shangguan Lingxiu intermittently, whether it was capturing her alive or killing her directly, Yun Yang's attention would be greatly distracted. Was it not the best way to kill him as soon as possible? Why was he being scolded? The man was confused, but he dared not pursue the matter. He turned to attack Yun Yang again. Shangguan Lingxiu did not pursue him either. She held her sword and stood where she was, unmoving. Yun Yang let out a long howl and guffawed. I didn't expect there to be a talent like you among the cashier assassins. How rare. Why don't you come to my side? As long as you're willing to come, I guarantee you a marquee title that can be passed down for 3 generations. The leader of the masked men in black snorted. Shut up. The whistling grew more intense. With a single thought, Yun Yang shrunk the defensive circle. The 9 men who surrounded him from 3 sides were gradually unable to fight to their fullest extent. 2 more men retreated. One of the 2 who retreated this time was the assistant of the ambushers, the other Dao realm cultivator. He was puzzled and could not figure it out. To him, the battle should have ended long ago. As long as Shangguan Lingxiu was held back, Yun Yang could be distracted immediately and speed up the killing. However, the leader did not allow him to do so. The assistant felt that the action was too unreasonable. As the helper, he had the responsibility and obligation to remind the leader what was the most effective method. The reputation of being shameless and despicable was not something people like them cared about. Coincidentally, the battle circle was shrinking again, so he retreated. The leader of the masked men in black watched as the assistant retreated to his side. A cold glint flashed in his eyes as he asked in a low voice, "Do you have an opinion?" The assistant was a Dao realm cultivator as well, so he was no pushover. He panted and said, "Of course. Your decision is rather inappropriate. Are you not going to allow me to say a few words? If we can't complete this mission, we'll definitely be held accountable by the Lord when we return. Are you going to bear this punishment alone?" What he meant was that if the mission could not be completed, he would have to suffer the consequences as well. The leader of the masked men in black scoffed in disdain. Speak. Why can't you target Shangguan Lingxiu and mess up Yun Yang's state of mind? The assistant did not hold back. You're neglecting the essentials, not taking the bright path and letting our brothers bleed and sacrifice themselves. What's the reason for that? Chapter 641. The leader snorted and said, "Our goal is to kill Yun Yang. What does it have to do with Shangguan Lingxiu? Don't you understand this?" The assistant retorted angrily, "I know this better than you do. The current situation is that we can't take Yun Yang down with brute force alone, but Shangguan Lingxiu will speed things up no matter what." The leader sighed softly. Looking at his assistant's furious gaze, he knew that he had to explain himself. The situation is obvious now. Shangguan Lingxiu knows that she can't escape, but she doesn't want to either. She knows that once she moves, Yun Yang's state of mind will be affected, whether she can escape or not. Even if she does manage to escape, Yun Yang can't guarantee her safety. That's why he's worried. Isn't that the case? Yes. Since Shangguan Lingxiu can't escape, Yun Yang has to keep her within his sight to be at ease. Her staying here is the main reason why Yun Yang can't escape. Do you understand what I'm saying? The leader was exasperated. Do you think that with Yun Yang's cultivation base, he really doesn't have a way to escape? I dare say that if he wants to leave, he'll only have to pay the price of a light injury and he can escape anytime he wants. Do you have any doubts about what I'm saying? The assistant was no fool, being able to reach the level of Dao realm. How could he not see that Yun Yang was only at a slight disadvantage after being besieged by more than a dozen people until now? If he wanted to escape, he would have left long ago. In other words, there must be something here that he could not let go of, and the only thing he could not let go of was Shangguan Lingxiu. What do you want by attacking Shangguan Lingxiu? Do you want Yun Yang to realize that he'll die if he's distracted? One dying is better than two dying together, so that he can decide to escape. If that's the case, can you stop him? The leader asked. He won't leave me be, will he? Put yourself in his shoes. If it were you, you'd naturally try your best to protect the people around you if you could ensure your own safety. What if you're in a situation where you're on the brink of death? Are you going to protect them with all your might? The leader said angrily, "Can't you use your brain? Is your brain just for decoration? That's why Shangguan Lingxiu can't leave or die. She can only stay here. As long as she can't leave, Yun Yang won't break out of the encirclement for the time being, right? Why do you have to announce such an obvious situation? What if we hold Shangguan Lingxiu hostage? Looks like you really are a pig. I've heard people say that even pigs can fly when they're in the eye of the storm. I've really broadened my horizons today." The leader said angrily, "We're obviously here to kill Yun Yang. If we capture Shangguan Lingxiu at this juncture, what do you think Yun Yang will do at once?" The deputy coughed. "Break out. Only when he left would there be a possibility of rescuing Shangguan Lingxiu. But if they accept the blackmail, then the two of them will only have a dead end." "That's right. If we were to go against Shangguan Lingxiu, with this lady's temper, she might even commit suicide when she realizes that she can't escape. By then, can you stop Yun Yang?" That was actually possible. You already know everything. Do you still want to ask? The leader's eyes were on the battlefield. "I really don't want to talk to you now. I understand your intention of not going against Shangguan Lingxiu." The deputy sighed and thought of a new question. "But why doesn't Shangguan Lingxiu leave on her own? She can escape. As long as she does, Yun Yang will have nothing to worry about." The leader was exasperated. He looked at his deputy like he was looking at a fool and said, "If she could leave, would she stay? If she really wanted to leave, would you let her go? She knows that she can't leave, that's why she's standing there. She's not participating in this battle that's beyond her ability to handle, but she's still maintaining a certain level of adaptability. This lady is obviously waiting, thinking the same thing as Yunyang. If Yunyang dies, she won't be able to live either. However, if the reinforcements come, both of them can live. This is an exceedingly intelligent, extraordinarily wise, and very strong-willed lady. Threats and restraints don't apply to these two people. The current situation is the best one. Do you understand? The deputy rolled his eyes, realizing that he was really an idiot. However, he was indignant and racked his brain to find a topic to talk about. Since the other party has reinforcements, why don't you join the battle as soon as possible and end this as soon as possible? The leader of the masked men in black sighed. I must change my deputy when I go back. If it really doesn't work, I'll request to be transferred to another team. I've King had enough. How could he have a brother-in-law like you? A pig will always be a pig, no matter how high his cultivation base is. Sigh. As he sighed, he felt an indescribable sense of melancholy. You can be stupid, but how can you be this stupid? He was utterly speechless. The deputy did not speak for a long while. In fact, he still had a retort in his heart that he dared not voice out. Do you King know who my brother-in-law is? If I'm a pig, what's my sister? What did my brother-in-law sleep with? How dare you call me a pig and stupid with that King brain of yours? How much better can you be? On the other side, Yunyang was already drenched in sweat and his breathing was uneven. Just like what the leader of the masked men had said, Yunyang could have left long ago if he wanted to. However, he could not. If he left, Shengguan Lingxiu would be finished. It was impossible for Yunyang to leave Shengguan Lingxiu behind and escape alone. Furthermore, Yunyang was confident that he could hold on until the reinforcements arrived. After all, he had left plenty of clues along the way. He believed that as long as he could hold on for a little longer, the reinforcements would come. However, Yunyang was not the only one who knew this. The masked men in black knew this as well, so they would only fight even harder. Unexpectedly, Yunyang's mystical qi supply was endless. Logically speaking, Yunyang's mystical qi should have been depleted long ago in the face of such high-frequency and oppressive attacks. Even if Yunyang had reserved some of his mystical qi, an expert who had reached the 3rd, 4th, or even 5th or 6th tier of Tao realm should have been depleted as well. Yet, Yunyang had persevered. Everyone present felt that this was inconceivable. Not only did Yunyang persevere, he could even find time to counterattack occasionally and cause considerable damage to the assassins. It was even more unbelievable. They could see that Yunyang was getting more and more fatigued, his eyes drenched in sweat as he panted harshly, his expression turning grim. However, the wounds on the assassins were increasing as well. They were also getting more and more tired. After all, they were all made of flesh and blood. The saber in Yunyang's hand left thin, bloody gashes on the assassins one after another. It was not that Yunyang did not want to cause further damage, but he could only inflict this level of damage with the time he was given. If he exerted too much force, he would fall into an unsalvageable state. In spite of this, Yunyang would not let go of the opportunity to injure his opponents. From the beginning to the end, as long as he attacked, it would be done with a marvelous saber technique. After hesitating for a long time, I did not want to write this chapter. I read many comments about it, but no one realized it. Chapter 642. Up until this point in the battle, the assassins in black could already count how exquisite Yunyang's saber skills were. There were a total of 6 styles that were repeated over and over again. In spite of this, these 6 styles were both offensive and defensive, making it feel like they were flawless and unbreakable. They could only attack with brute force and destroy them forcefully. However, once they did so, one or two people would always be slightly injured. Yun Yang was not feeling good as the battle continued. He was in a dire situation where he could lose his life at any time. However, the assassins who were his opponents were not feeling good either. The one who was in the worst condition had more than 130 wounds on his body. Although they were all flesh wounds, only scratching the skin and not entering the muscle layer, it was still excruciating. The surface area of a person's body was not small, but to have more than 130 wounds on one's body was terrifying just thinking about it. It was almost the same as death by 1,000 cuts, okay? The 11 people, including the one whose hand had been cut off by Yun Yang, were all staring at Yun Yang with wide eyes, their hearts filled with hatred. They kept repeating the same phrase, "Why the F***ck haven't you fallen yet? Why the F***ck haven't you fallen yet?" They did not know, nor could they imagine, that not only would Yun Yang not fall, he would bring them a huge surprise. In fact, Yun Yang had been preparing his counterattack and it was almost time now. The endless divine art had been circulating in Yun Yang's meridians like a great river. If he had continued to attack with all his might and without regard for the cost, Yun Yang might not have been able to hold on until now. He might have broken through the siege long ago. However, when the battle had reached a certain point, when everyone was at their wits' end, Yun Yang was surprised to realize that he seemed to have a chance to turn the situation around. As long as he persisted in inflicting small wounds on these assassins, the effect would be apparent. In terms of the situation between the attacker and the defender, it was the attacker who had expended more energy. Coupled with the constant injuries, everyone seemed to be giving their best on the surface. Even they themselves looked like they were attacking with all their might. In spite of this, Yun Yang, who was in the midst of the battle, could clearly feel that the extent of his opponent's attack was much smaller than when they had not been injured. When anyone was injured, it was inevitable that they would subconsciously avoid aggravating the wound. It was a human instinct. This was something that even the person himself would not notice, much less a third party. It was this instinct that had become Yun Yang's life-saving straw and an opportunity to turn the tide of the battle. I do consume a lot of energy, but I don't sustain many injuries. The Divine Edge Saber Art was the best saber art in the world. As the enemy's attack weakened, Yun Yang's endless divine art naturally unleashed an effect that was far beyond an ordinary person's imagination. He could replenish his qi at any time and quickly. Therefore, after Yun Yang had made it through the first half of the match, he had gradually become more at ease, even relaxed. It was just that he deliberately acted as if he would be exhausted at any time, tottering, and collapsing at any time to confuse others. In other words, no matter how much Yun Yang was sweating profusely and staggering, it was merely an act. The advantage of doing this was that it gave the killers a feeling that as long as they put in a little more effort, this guy would be killed by us. However, the assassins increased their strength, and increased their strength again, and increased their strength, a few more times. Yun Yang was still struggling at death's door. No matter how heavily he panted, he would not fall. Looking at the situation, it was certainly strange, but to put it bluntly, life was just like a play. It was all acting, there was nothing real about it. It was not worth anything. As time went on, Yun Yang grew more confident. He suddenly burst out with Shengguan Lingxiu and broke out of the encirclement. Even when there was an expert watching from the sidelines, waiting for an opportunity to strike, Yun Yang was no longer afraid. Yun Yang, who had actually turned the tide of the battle and had the situation under his control, suddenly had a thought: he did not want to leave. He had finally managed to drag the enemy to the brink of death. If he were to leave just like that, would it not be a waste of effort? Especially when his own reinforcements could arrive at any time. No matter who it was, be it Lao Mei, Marquis Yun, the four noble young masters, or the concourse of the underworld, all of them would do. As long as they came, together with the reinforcements, he could definitely kill a large portion of these people before him with a sudden burst of energy. Furthermore, Yunyang wanted to take this opportunity to see if the Four Seasons Tower had any other forces. If there were any other experts involved, it would save him the trouble of searching for a needle in a haystack. Another reason that supported Yunyang's crazy plan was that if he could not test the magical prediction that he had just comprehended in a real battle, it would be difficult to see through it. He remembered clearly that when Ling Xiaozui and the others were fighting, almost all of the unparalleled experts had the same prediction and their performance was much more brilliant than what he had comprehended. The chance to comprehend in a moment of life and death like this was rare. How could he let it go so easily? Yunyang even had the time to daydream at such a critical moment. If Emmy was still here and the space was still here, he might only be able to comprehend it a little later. The battle was getting more and more intense. As Yunyang's endless divine art was operating at full force, the mystical medicinal power that had been stored deep in his meridians, flesh, and blood was slowly unleashed, bringing Yunyang's recovery to a whole new level. The mystical medicinal power that had been stored for a long time was dissolving bit by bit at an infuriatingly slow rate. Once it had dissolved, it would generate a massive energy that surged into Yunyang's meridians like a tsunami. Sensing the changes in his body, Yunyang was even more reluctant to leave. How could there be a more suitable atmosphere for improvement than a real battle of life and death? Breaking out now? That would be a reckless waste of God's gift, a foolish act to miss the opportunity. I look like I'm struggling in a life and death crisis, but in fact, do you all know that I'm actually growing stronger? The power in my body is becoming stronger and stronger. Yunyang could clearly feel the immense power surging within him. It was like a sword that was forged from the toughest metal in the world. Only when it was struck by an unparalleled force could it gradually reveal its sharpness. At this moment, the frequency of the strikes had only managed to strike the sword embryo until the rust had completely peeled off. There was still a long way to go before the treasured sword was truly formed and glowing with a chilling light, so, how could this battle be stopped? Yunyang even hoped that the few people who were watching from the sidelines would stop watching and join in as well. Let the storm come fiercer. I need all of you to *CK me up, brothers. Use more strength. Use more strength. Chapter 643. Once Yunyang thought of this, he naturally acted on his thoughts and fought with all his might. As the saber light flashed, the 7 to 8 people on the opposite side were encircled. The assassins felt the pressure multiply, they could only grit their teeth and muster more strength to charge forward. Only the brave would emerge victorious. Since Yunyang was fighting with all his might, it was exactly what he wanted. However, what shocked the assassins the next moment was this the final radiance of the setting sun? His strength was growing, each strike heavier than the one before. This was going to ruin them. The assassins could only grit their teeth as they grumbled inwardly. They could only hope that this fellow's strength would pass quickly. Amidst the barrage of attacks, Yunyang, who was on the verge of collapsing, suddenly roared into the sky, the saber in his hand glowing brilliantly. An indescribably radiant saber light spread out abruptly. Clang, 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 7 or 8 consecutive loud sounds of weapons clashing rang out. All the people surrounding him felt as if they were being chopped down by a god with a mountain-splitting axe. The power that seemed to be able to destroy everything caused everyone to stagger back a few steps. At this point, the battle circle had suddenly expanded, and the flaws had also appeared. Yunyang let out a long howl that was filled with determination. He's going to break through. The eyes of the black-clothed leader flickered. Everyone is here. Press forward. Other than the leader of the masked men, his assistant and even the one with a broken arm charged forward to stop Yunyang. The assistant was too embarrassed to stay by his leader's side after being scolded earlier. The contemptuous gaze made him feel like a pig. Am I a pig? I'm not, definitely not. So I'd better go and fight. Facing such a gaze, it's really, King hell, I'll tell my brother-in-law when I get back. If you don't want to be in my group, I'm King lazy to be in your group. As the 4 people who were watching the battle joined the fray, the pressure on Yun Yang increased abruptly, multiplying by several folds. Yun Yang's panting was like bellows, as if he could even puff out his lungs at the very next moment. He was holding on with all his might. The assassins grew even more spirited when they saw this. Just a little bit more. Then it'll be over, the assistant yelled. It would have been better if he hadn't shouted. Almost all the assassins subconsciously rolled their eyes when they heard this. You're the one who's been shouting this all along, all right? Up until now, you must have shouted it more than 40 times. Put in more effort. Give your sister more strength. How could he still have the strength? Damn it. Do you think everyone is like you? He had rested for such a long time, no matter what. Yun Yang's condition seemed to be worsening under the joint attack of so many assassins. Not only was he wobbling, his face was as pale as a sheet and he was drenched in sweat, drenching his clothes, but he was still trying his best to hold himself together. Clang 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 clang, as if they were forging iron. Yun Yang's current state was different from before. Compared to his pretentious state earlier, only half of it was faked now, the other half, or even more than half, was an actual state of exhaustion. Such a state seemed to defy common sense, even a simple description would be contradictory and difficult to justify. However, Yun Yang's state was indeed so. The energy within Yun Yang's body was still surging endlessly. From the perspective of mystical qi alone, there was no need to worry about it being depleted. Even if this went on for another 3 days and 3 nights, there was no possibility of it being depleted. This was a part of being in a perfect state. However, the comprehensive embodiment of combat power was not only limited to mystical qi cultivation base, there was also the application of combat skills, the execution of strategies and tactics, as well as the exhaustion of stamina. The combination of all these factors was the pinnacle of a person's combat power. Yun Yang's mystical qi, his skills and tactics were all handled with ease, but the last one, which was his stamina, was showing signs of exhaustion. After all, he had been through a series of violent collisions. Facing such a forceful battle, the exhaustion of a person's stamina was unimaginably intense. Even if he had the endless divine art to rely on, he would gradually run out of energy, and his strength would not be enough. Of course, it was not that the endless divine art was not powerful enough. It was just that Yun Yang's cultivation of this cultivation method was still too shallow and had yet to reach a sufficiently high level. Perhaps it was another way of saying that there was a limit to one's stamina. As the battle went on, the leader of the masked men in black had been watching Yun Yang's every move, paying attention to every detail. Seeing that Yun Yang's weakened state was becoming more and more obvious, he was getting closer and closer to the moment of his decisive strike as he continued to be in this state. His eyes began to glow with a bloodthirsty gleam. On the opposite side, Shangguan Lingxiu had been paying attention to the assassin who had yet to make a move. At this moment, her gaze was icy as well, her mystical qi had long been elevated. However, the leader of the masked men, who was ready to strike at any time, had his eyes bulging, almost popping out of their sockets. This was because he had witnessed an extremely shocking and unforeseen event. This shock even caused his body to tremble for a moment. It was like a person who had suddenly spasmed in his deep sleep. Yun Yang, who was initially exhausted, had probably thought that he would not be able to hold on any longer. However, there seemed to be an inexplicable burst of energy within Yun Yang's body, allowing Yun Yang to regain his combat strength. At that moment, Yun Yang, who was directly involved, could clearly feel that his bones, limbs, and tendons seemed to have been dislocated. It was also at this moment that a faint glow erupted from his body. The layer of light disappeared in a flash. If it were not for everyone's full attention on Yunyang, they might not have noticed it. In the next moment, everyone was shocked to see an even more bizarre scene. Yunyang's body that was drenched in sweat had turned black. It was like he was in the middle of a fight when mud suddenly crawled out from his body. It was a mudslide. It was not just one mudslide, but countless mudslides that covered his entire body in an instant. The leader of the masked men in black and the rest of the masked men were collectively dumbfounded at this moment. All the assassins in black had a cultivation base of heaven realm and above. Each of them could be said to be experts in cultivation. Everyone knew what state Yunyang was currently in. He was in the midst of a battle of life and death, but he had actually undergone a cleansing of his meridians? What was going on? Can't we just play properly? The masked men in black were dumbfounded. Little did they know that Yunyang was also surprised by his current state. However, he knew better than the masked men that he was not undergoing a cleansing of his meridians. Instead, there was a shocking change happening within his body that he could somewhat understand but did not quite understand. Chakras. In the knowledge of Tianxian continent's cultivators, a person had 9 chakras. Those who could connect all 9 chakras were unparalleled geniuses. However, Yunyang was no longer concerned about this because he had already connected all 9 chakras. Therefore, he had always taken it for granted that his aptitude was already top-notch and that there was no more room for improvement in the path of talent. However, at that moment, after his body had gone through an infinite number of extremes and an infinite number of times, 2 more chakras had been connected without any warning or reason. Yes, 2 more chakras were connected beyond the 9 chakras. The moment he noticed the change, Yunyang was so shocked that his saber form was about to fall apart. Chapter 644. If the men in black had not been shocked by Yunyang's mudslide state and were stunned for a moment, Yunyang would have been slightly injured even if he had not died. Yunyang's thoughts raced. Didn't they say that there are only 9 chakras in a person's body? What about the 2 newly awakened chakras that I've just awakened? The further question was, how many chakras could there be in a person's body? Yunyang did not have an answer to this question yet, but there was another problem that he needed to deal with. It was not an external threat, but an internal one. An unfamiliar force had suddenly surged within him. The force was strange and unfamiliar, but it was so powerful that it could not be contained. Yunyang even imagined that he might not advance because of the breakthrough of this power, because before he could do so, he would already be bursting and crushed by this ridiculously powerful force. It was truly an unstoppable force that was hard to control. Fortunately, Yunyang could feel his deific consciousness giving off a strong jolt as well. The powerful force had actually charged into his deific consciousness space. Under the immense pressure of the force, his deific consciousness space that had been dormant for so long had actually, a voice that he had not heard for a long time entered Yunyang's consciousness. Aya, at the same time, the leader in black sprung up like a bolt of lightning, charging towards Yunyang with the determination of a moth to a flame, intending to kill him and eliminate any future threats. The leader in black had the highest cultivation base among the people present. At this moment, he could clearly feel one thing. Throughout his entire life, this was probably the only opportunity that could truly kill Yunyang, including all the cultivators in the entire Tianxian continent. Once he missed this opportunity, he would never be able to kill Yunyang. It was impossible for anyone to do so. With his thoughts in mind and his body in action, he had made his move just like that. He had done everything he could, given it his all in one strike, seeking to kill Yunyang. Just when everyone was still in shock and had not expected this to happen, Shangguan Lingxiu had been paying attention to Yunyang, paying attention to every detail. No one would know that from the beginning of the assassination until now, Shangguan Lingxiu's heart had never been filled with fear, dread, or terror. Negative emotions like these had nothing to do with her. From the beginning to the end, Shangguan Lingxiu's heart was filled with only one feeling. sweetness. At the moment of the assassination attempt. The moment Yun Yang wrapped his arms around her waist and leaped out of the window, Yun Yang's eyes widened. She could clearly feel Yun Yang's breathing, his heartbeat, his temperature. As a result, the sweetness in her heart rose all the way to the limit. So much so that she even felt slightly grateful to these assassins who came to kill her. To Shengguan Lingxiu, she really did not care about eternity. Possessing it once, possessing it for a moment was enough. I originally wanted to have an ordinary experience and bury it in the bottom of my heart. Then, even if I didn't get anything in the end, this ordinary experience would be able to comfort me in the endless years. The long night, the lonely life, every time he thought about it, he could still remember that he still had this kind of youth, that he once had this kind of budding feeling. But she didn't expect that at this moment, it would bring her an unforgettable and earth-shattering experience. A love of life and death. Once she reached the top of the wall, Shengguan Lingxiu immediately stood in a blind spot and made a decision. I'm already satisfied. I won't be a burden to him. If someone were to come and capture me as a threat, would commit suicide immediately to avoid being a burden to Yun Yang. Similarly, if someone were to use me to attract his attention and distract him, I would commit suicide immediately as well to avoid any possibility of Yun Yang being in a disadvantageous situation. What's left is to watch from here. My cultivation base can't help him, I'll only add to his troubles if I join the battle. I can only watch. Watch the man I love fight, bathed in blood. If he wins, we leave safely, if the reinforcements come, we leave together, if he loses, unfortunately, I hold back my strength and perhaps I can fight for a way out for him. If there's no luck in the end, we'll still die together. That's all there is to it. Therefore, she had been watching Yun Yang's movements as he stood in front of her like a nail. He was like a sturdy mountain that blocked the attacks of the assassins that were like raging waves, leaving nothing to chance. Therefore, Shengguan Lingxiu did not feel the slightest bit of fear throughout the entire process. There was only happiness. Actually, my biggest wish in this life is nothing more than to be the woman behind a man's back like this today. Perhaps I can create a glory and legend that belongs to us women if I continue to fight. I'm confident that I can do it. However, when you fall in love with someone, you'll realize that all the glory are nothing compared to him. Even if I'm foolish and stubborn, I won't regret it. Watching Yun Yang panting, watching him fight, bathed in blood, Shengguan Lingxiu's heart ached, but her state of mind remained calm and unruffled. I'll accompany you through life and death, never abandoning you. At this moment, Shengguan Lingxiu did not even think twice when she saw the black-robed leader leaping up. She moved with him the moment the black-robed leader launched his ambush, her tall, slender body rising into the air. The reason for Shengguan Lingxiu's reaction was simple. From her point of view, Yun Yang had not noticed the leader in black's ambush. Perhaps, there was something wrong with his body. Even the most basic movement was stiff at this moment. Therefore, she had to step up and fight for a little bit of time for Yun Yang. Just a little bit would do. She had to fight for it with her life. The leader in black's speed was like lightning, so fast that it was indescribable. Shengguan Lingxiu's speed, on the other hand, had reached the peak of her lifetime. Her slender form followed a straight trajectory in the air, charging forward without looking back. The sword in her hand glinted with a chilling gleam as her arm was stretched straight forward. The tip of the sword was still glowing with energy. Shengguan Lingxiu's cultivation base had yet to reach the heaven realm, but it was already an amazing performance to be able to execute such a skill that was brimming with energy. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it had surpassed the limits of one's cultivation base. However, such a performance was not even worth mentioning to the leader in black. He could tell at a glance that the skill that Shengguan Lingxiu had executed was incomparably imposing and did not mind sacrificing herself, but the greatest effect that could be achieved was, at most, to stop him for half a breath's time. Perhaps it was not even half a breath's time. As the saying went, overestimating one's own strength was not even comparable to a mantis trying to stop a chariot. It would be more appropriate to describe it as an ant trying to shake a tree. What he did not know was that Shangguan Lingxiu's request had never been to delay him for too long. What she wanted was a blink of an eye, a moment's buffer time. That would be enough. It would be enough for Yun Yang to react, defend, counterattack, and even escape. As long as she could buy that bit of buffer time for Yun Yang to react, Shangguan Lingxiu felt that she could die without regrets, no matter what Yun Yang chose. Both sides were like two streams of light, approaching each other in the air at high speeds. The leader in black sighed inwardly as he looked at Shangguan Lingxiu's calm, almost expressionless face and her irrevocably determined gaze. Such a peerless beauty was about to perish under his sword. It was to be done in such a horrifying manner. It was truly regrettable. Chapter 645. The masked leader in black let out a long howl, his eyes gleaming as he increased his strength. He had to ensure that he could finish off Shangguan Lingxiu in the shortest amount of time possible and maintain the direction of his attack before attacking Yun Yang. This was an opportunity that he could not afford to miss. However, at this critical juncture, a ray of light flashed abruptly. This ray of light was indescribably dazzling. It was like the Milky Way in the sky had fallen abruptly in between the two swords. A saber appeared out of thin air and appeared at the spot where the two swords were about to clash. At this moment, the distance between the two swords was only a finger's length away. They were about to collide violently. However, it was such a small distance that the saber had appeared abruptly at the same spot. This saber seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, completely exceeding the understanding of everyone present. The design of this saber was extremely elegant, and the streamline was even more beautiful. Just by looking at this saber, one could feel a kind of extreme splendor. Anyone who saw the saber could not help but admit that this saber was one of a kind in this world. Then, the saber slashed towards the assassin leader's sword. Just as the saber appeared and stopped the battle, Shangguan Lingxiu felt a hand gently pulling on her shoulder, restraining her at once. Then, the hand gave a gentle push and she retreated lightly. A faint voice said, "Don't worry, I'm here for you." Then, a loud explosion could be heard. It was as if countless rays of light had burst out from where the saber and sword had collided. Amidst the haze, Yun Yang's howl could be heard, piercing through the clouds, "Come on." His voice was laced with indescribable confidence and arrogance that looked down on the world. It was the arrogance of being able to dominate the world. What followed was an exclamation from the other side, "How could this be? How could this be?" Then, an underworld fog suddenly rushed over from all directions. It covered the sky and covered the earth, covering the entire area. Another shout that belonged to King Xiaoyao, Yun Xiaoyao, rang out, "Kill! Don't let anyone escape! Who dares hit my boss? Young master!" Countless figures flashed from all directions, rushing down like a torrential storm. An unstoppable pressure descended and engulfed the surroundings. At this time, a black shadow rapidly rose up and transformed into a black streamer of light. It fled for its life towards the sky. Along the way, it successively resisted the attacks of several people, but it still broke through the underworld fog and escaped the encirclement. It disappeared in a flash. The black silhouette was the leader of the masked men in black. His cultivation base was the highest among the assassins in black. He had reacted early and had not participated in the siege against Yun Yang, so his combat power was the most complete. Yun Yang had not only saved Shangguan Lingxiu from death's door with his saber just now, he had also shattered her treasured sword and almost dismembered her. Seeing that Yun Yang's current ability was so powerful, the masked leader in black knew that only death awaited him if he stayed. Seeing the wraith fog rising from all directions and Yun Yang's experts coming to his aid, he made a prompt decision to break out of the encirclement at once, escaping with his life. Even though this person had reacted early and was lucky enough to escape, it wasn't completely without paying a price. Right at the moment he charged out of the netherworld fog, he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. In spite of this, the price he paid was the difference between life and death for the others. Now that the situation had changed, forget about the arrival of Yun Yang's reinforcements, just the sudden increase in Yun Yang's combat power alone had caused the ambush to fall apart. There was no longer any possibility of success. Furthermore, the other party's army was stronger than his own, and they had the help of the concourse of the underworld. The disparity in strength was huge. In addition to Yun Yang, whose combat power had increased exponentially, the others were destined not to be able to escape. This was something he absolutely believed. He also believed that if he had hesitated for even a moment, he would most likely not have been able to escape. Therefore, at the last moment when Marquis Yun's voice had yet to reach him and the concourse of the underworld's wraith fog had yet to completely surround him, he had borrowed the recoil from Yun Yang's attack to soar into the sky and escape at full speed. He did not even turn his head back. Yun Yang stared at the direction where the leader of the masked men in black had escaped, deep in thought for a moment. It was not that no one had tried to stop the masked man in black from escaping, but none of them had managed to do so. However, if Yun Yang had tried to stop him, it would have been quite possible. After all, Yun Yang felt like he was in his peak condition right now, even better than the best he could have been. He would definitely be able to stop this guy. However, Yun Yang did not do so, choosing to let the other party leave. If he did not let him go back, how could the Go manual be delivered to Sir Bai? Looking at the 10 assassins who were surrounded by Yun Xiaoyao, Lao Mei's reinforcements, and the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld, Yun Yang smirked coldly as they staggered left and right, as if they were going to fall on their own even without being attacked. "Don't kill them, I want them alive." Boss said, "I want them alive." It was Dong Tianling's voice. The 4 noble young masters had come over with their guards as well. With 3 layers of encirclement inside and 3 layers outside, the assassins were surrounded like a mountain surrounded by an iron bucket. With a flash of white, Ji Lingxi appeared in front of Yun Yang. She scanned him from head to toe and asked softly, "Are you all right?" I'm fine." Yun Yang smiled. When Yun Yang finally let out a breath, he actually felt a little dizzy and his vision a little blurry. It was the side effect of extreme exhaustion. The moment he relaxed, it exploded. Ji Lingxi smiled and ignored Yun Yang, coming to Shangguan Lingxiu instead. "Sister Lingxiu, are you all right?" Shangguan Lingxiu smiled softly. "Of course I'm fine, but I'm afraid young Master Yun must be exhausted from this battle. It's best to send him back to rest as soon as possible." Ji Lingxi nodded. "Sister Lingxiu, come back with us. We sisters can discuss anything." Shangguan Lingxiu bit her lip, wanting to reject the offer, but looking at Yun Yang's pale face, she was still worried, so she said, "All right." After a moment of commotion, the 10 exhausted and wounded assassins captured all of them alive almost effortlessly. 5 or 6 of them collapsed like a pile of mud before their meridians could be sealed after they were captured. Their bodies were drenched in sweat, their tongues hanging out as they panted, their eyes rolling back and forth. They looked like they were about to pass out from exhaustion. The people from the concourse of the underworld had just escorted the assassins back to the residence of Yun when they disappeared in a flash. Before they left, however, they cast a glance at Yun Yang in unison. Their gazes were very strange. It was like they were looking at a monster. It was comforting to be seen as a monster by an organization that the martial world regarded as a monster. King Chujiang said, "I say, this young Master Yun is really remarkable. He can do what others can't. King Qingguang, the ally you found is really mysterious and extraordinary. First Court King Qingguang was speechless. Chapter 646. First Court King Qingguang was baffled by Yun Yang's ability as well. He did not know more than the others. Hearing what King Chujiang had said to him, he was dumbfounded. Today's incident has indeed broadened my horizons once again. TSK, Tisk, Emperor Song and King Wuguan clicked their tongues and shook their heads as they walked into the room. More noises could be heard. The other kings wore expressions of bewilderment as well, deep in thought. Thousands of thoughts were running rampant in their minds. Based on the outcome alone, today's matter was just a very ordinary battle. It was nothing more than one party being assassinated and waiting for reinforcements. Under very, very difficult circumstances, one party had fought valiantly and finally managed to hold out until the arrival of reinforcements. Then, they had turned defeat into victory and killed the ambushing enemy, wiping them all out in one fell swoop. Was this not a very normal thing to do? Although it was not common, it was still within reason. Moreover, it was commonly seen in novels. It was common and very common. However, in the eyes of high-level cultivators like the 10 Court Yama kings, the entire incident was simply unbelievable. There were too many suspicious points, too many incomprehensible things that went against common sense. It was an assassin's habit to analyze a battle thoroughly, especially such a strange one. Everyone's eyes were on the King of Equality. The King of Equality said faintly, "The ambushing party sent out a total of 16 top-notch assassins. Even the weakest of these assassins is stronger than our gold-ranked assassins. Their combined combat power is astonishing. Even if they were to target any one of us, it would be more than enough. This is also referring to us after our abilities had a breakthrough." However, even with such a lineup, the final result was still a great loss. We captured 10 people on the scene and only one managed to escape. As for the 5 people who died before this, 2 of them were cleaved into halves. I believe everyone can see this. The next step in the process of death should be a single move. The attacker exerted his full strength and killed both of them in one blow. There were no tricks involved, it was a clean kill. Everyone nodded. There was another person who died because he was kicked. There was a footprint on his lower abdomen. Not only did the force of the kick enter from the front to the back, but it also destroyed all the meridians, bones, and organs in the lower abdomen. There was no one who was lucky enough to survive. The other person looks unharmed on the surface, but his internal organs are all shattered. The saber hilt in his hand is also filled with cracks. Yun Yang's forceful counterattack must have broken his weapon. Not only did he break his weapon, he even penetrated it and destroyed his internal organs. How could he not die? As for the last person, he died from a saber wound as well. However, his fatal wound was a slit in the throat, but it was different from a normal slit in the throat. A normal slit in the throat would travel horizontally, but this person's slit in the throat traveled vertically from the bottom up. The edge of the saber probably quivered a little, causing the wound to appear strangely distorted. These signs prove that Yun Yang was attacked and injured when he killed this person, but he did not stop his killing because of his injury. Instead, he forced himself to stay and killed this person with a single slash. Everyone knew that the King of Equality's analytical and reasoning ability was ridiculously strong, so they listened quietly without interjecting. After coming to the conclusion of the deceased's cause of death, I'm even more confused. The King of Equality said, "From the traces we've observed along the way, Yun Yang's first move was a fatal one. He killed 2 people in one go. Although he succeeded, his mystical chi was inevitably depleted, and it was even more difficult for him to move freely while carrying another person. Therefore, when he faced the third person, he must have used some trickery and kicked the other person to death. He even borrowed the force from the kick to move to the next location. Then, when he faced the fourth person, he mustered his mystical chi to the limit again and killed the other person with one strike. This was the extreme exertion of his true skill, or else it wouldn't have been possible. However, everyone knows that Yun Yang's true cultivation base is only half a step to Tao realm. The one who was killed with one slash was a cultivator at the pinnacle of the 8th heaven realm. The absolute gap between their abilities isn't that great. The only reason for such an outcome is that Yun Yang must have risked his life at that time. I believe that it's also because of the continuous mustering of his mystical chi and the continuous depletion that when he killed the last assassin, he wasn't strong enough. Perhaps the other party was about to surround him, so he killed his opponent quickly at the cost of a little injury. Does anyone have any objections to these deductions? No objections, I agree completely. The other 9 Yama kings nodded like chicks pecking at grains. Each of the 10 court Yama kings was an outstanding figure in the world of assassins. Naturally, they were familiar with the art of killing, so they had no objections and reached a consensus immediately. Based on the facts above, we can make a further deduction. Although Yun Yang killed the 5 of them swiftly, he paid a hefty price. Not only did he unleash his maximum ability twice, but he was also slightly injured as a result. Does anyone have any objections to this? No, that's it. It's also because of this reason that Yun Yang slowed down after killing the 5 people, causing him to be surrounded and unable to escape. Of course, another reason for the difficulty in escaping is Shengguan Lingxiu, but the main reason is that Yun Yang didn't have enough time to catch his breath. If Yun Yang was still in his peak condition after killing the 5 people, he could have broken out of the encirclement even if he had to bring Shengguan Lingxiu along. Does anyone have any objections to this? No. It should be like this. Let me ask one more thing. Everyone can raise any questions or objections to all the deductions above. Does anyone have any questions? Ask the King of Equality. The other 9 did not answer directly this time, but after a moment of contemplation, they signaled cautiously one after another. No one had any objections or questions. The King of Equality heaved a long sigh. I'm afraid you're taking it for granted that you don't have any questions or objections. I, on the other hand, have many questions that I don't understand. There are questions everywhere, big questions. Why don't you have any objections? The group was stunned when they heard him, asking in confusion, what questions? What discoveries? The King of Equality said, the first question is the battle traces left behind on the battlefield. That is, from the hotel to the many traces left behind along the way, we can easily confirm that there were many hidden weapon experts who worked together. Other than the hidden weapon experts, there were at least 2 or 3 who were proficient in deicide bow archery. Don't tell me you didn't discover this? The group nodded. Yes, we did. So what? Nothing much. When Yun Yang jumped out of the restaurant, he couldn't help but be ambushed by the deicide bows. There were at least 3 archers firing together, but where did these hidden weapon experts, especially the 3 deicide archers, go when he was besieged? If they had continued to attack, it should have affected the battle considerably, the King of Equality asked quietly. The group's eyes widened as they thought about it. TSK. Have you thought of it? Is it shocking? Of the people who had attacked him earlier, 5 were dead, and the 6th had his hands severed. It looked like a rather difficult result, but the real mystery was yet to come. When the other party surrounded Yun Yang, it was advantageous to end the battle quickly. It should have been the time for those who were proficient in hidden weapons to show their prowess, but those hidden weapon experts and deicide archers didn't even fire a single hidden weapon or shoot an arrow. Why is this so? Where did these hidden weapon experts go? If this chapter is written, there will be a lot of criticism, but if it's not written, the protagonist's awesomeness can't be shown. Chapter 647. Where did these secret weapon experts go? The King of Equality asked menacingly. First Court King Qingguang was tongue-tied as he said, "The only reasonable explanation is that the 5 people he killed earlier and the one whose right hand was chopped off are all of the adepts who are proficient in secret weapons and deicide bao in this trip." Hearing King Qingguang's reasonable explanation, everyone looked at each other in dismay. Their faces were filled with shock. This was the only possibility. If this was the truth, was Yunyang not terrifying? However, other than this possibility, there seemed to be no other reasonable possibility. There was no other possibility that could make the assassins give up on their plan to lead the other party to a quick victory. In the face of a sudden and fatal attack that came without any warning, he quickly formulated his own strategy and tactics to deal with it. He accurately found the enemy who posed the greatest threat to him at the first possible moment and killed them all before he escaped to the battlefield where he could wait for reinforcements to arrive. This was to prevent any variables from appearing and interfering with the development of the battle. Such scheming is truly shocking, terrifying, and appalling. First Court King Qingguang could not help sucking in a cold breath as he thought about it. What kind of brain did he possess? Was he still human? Among these assassins, the weakest one's cultivation base was also at the 6th heaven realm. The King of Equality said in a low voice, "As for the strongest one, the only one who managed to escape, his cultivation base was at the 2nd or even 3rd heaven of Dao realm. Yunyang's cultivation base, on the other hand, we all know that he's only at the 9th heaven realm, half a step to Dao realm at most. His actual ability was far behind the other party and he had to adapt hastily, even bringing along a woman who was a complete burden. Yet, he had to kill the 5 secret weapon experts who posed the greatest threat to him within an extremely short distance before choosing a place to wait for reinforcements to begin the final battle. He was delaying the battle and waiting for reinforcements. He sucked in a long breath and said, "Let's not talk about others. If it were me, I wouldn't have been able to do it. You should know that when we arrived, the combat power of those who participated in the siege was less than 30% of their original state. Yunyang's delaying tactic wasn't just to delay the battle and wait for reinforcements. In fact, he alone had already worn them down." Everyone fell silent. The more he thought about it, the more terrified he became. Just how sharp of an observation skill was needed to accomplish all of this? Just how terrifying of a calculation was needed? Just how subtle of an operation was needed? Just how much, all of this was unimaginable and unbelievable. Actually, what's even more unbelievable is the battle after that. The King of Equality sighed. "I believe that you have not overlooked the fact that those assassins are all using heavy weapons. They have adopted a head-on strategy. Why is that so? Obviously, the assassins are afraid of Yunyang's combat skills, which is why they've chosen such a barbaric and unreasonable method to counter Yunyang's marvelous skill. Of course, this is also because they have the advantage in numbers. It is reasonable for them to make such a choice. If it were us, we would also make the same choice. However, what baffles me the most about this battle is, with Yunyang's cultivation base, he could actually fight against so many ace cultivators and still hold on until our reinforcements arrived. This is really incomprehensible. Even if Yunyang is a local tyrant and found a relatively advantageous terrain for him, it's impossible for him to overcome such a huge disadvantage. It can't be that the assassins have shown him mercy, can it? Puzzled as it is, Yunyang has done it after all. This is the truth and the main point." The King of Equality sighed. "As long as such a character lives on, I believe his future will be unimaginable." The kings were speechless. "No matter what height he goes to in the future, I won't find it strange anymore." The King of Equality smiled bitterly. "Perhaps we should thank King Qingguang now. We were still calling him an idiot back then, but, if he had done nothing back then, we would no longer be friends now. I'd rather be the enemy of the Four Seasons Tower's Mr. Nian than be afraid to be the enemy of any expert in the arcane realm, but I'm not willing to be the enemy of someone like Yun Yang. The King of Equality said resolutely. The situation was similar to that of the 10 Yama kings of the concourse of the underworlds for noble young masters. Ever since they returned, the 4 young masters were surprised to find that their guards were all silent. Occasionally, their gazes would meet, but it was as if they knew each other and understood each other's intentions. Of course, it was more of the shock of understanding than anything else. As they witnessed the situation, the 4 fellows who were usually insensitive also felt that something was amiss. Naturally, they were not too afraid of their subordinates and asked directly. "What's wrong with all of you? Are you all glaring at each other? What's with that shocked gaze? Haven't we won the battle today? Elder Yun has shown his prowess, dominating the world and dominating the universe." Cough. An elderly guard hesitated and said softly, "Young Master Yun's elegance is more than this. This battle is enough to create a new miracle in the history of the martial world." Miracle? The 4 young masters were dumbfounded. Their bewilderment was real. They had long been used to Yun Yang's high profile and had habitually placed Yun Yang on a high pedestal. Today, when they saw Yun Yang fighting against many and not being at a disadvantage, they were amazed, but they did not take it to heart. What they said just now was more out of habit, the habitual flattery of Yun Yang. Although it was sincere, there was nothing more to it. In spite of this, the guards who followed the 4 noble young masters were all veterans of the martial world. Recently, they had been fortunate enough to cultivate in a sacred cultivation ground like the residence of Yun. They had even gone through the life-and-death battles of the Fortress of Resilience. Everyone's cultivation base, knowledge, and judgment had been greatly enhanced. Complemented by their past experiences, how could they not be shocked by Yun Yang's performance today? Miracle. Truly a miracle. The guard sighed and recounted what he had seen. Of course, his description was not as thorough as the King of Equalities, but as a veteran of the martial world, his vision was equally sharp and vicious, pointing straight to the crux of the matter. "I've always known that Boss is amazing, but I didn't expect Boss to be so brilliant in all aspects other than his cultivation base and skills." Dong Tianlong was delighted after listening to the guard. "That's my boss indeed." Chun Wanfeng was fascinated as well. "If I were in the same situation, I'd be so cool just thinking about it." "It's so cool, how can he be so cool?" Xia Bingchuan pursed his lips. "If you were in such a situation, the grass on your grave would have sprouted a dozen times by now." Qiu Yunsan looked disdainful. "What are you 3 fools talking about? Wasn't Boss like this before? If he wasn't at this level, would he still be our boss? Now that it's all over, all of you still want to be glorified here. Look at me, how calm I am." He walked away with his arms behind his back. "When you see Boss tomorrow, you're not allowed to flatter him. Just listen to me. I'll only speak the truth, say that Boss is chivalrous, gentle, courageous, and handsome, a dragon among men. Beat this bastard up, beat him up until he can't speak. The truth can't be spoken blindly, at least not by him alone. There was a sudden power outage last night. I don't know what happened, but the wiring was burnt. The property management said it would take a few days. The wiring of more than 10 floors needs to be replaced, it's all burnt. The property management is investigating the cause as well. I'm sweating. F***CK, it was 1 step away from a fire. Your father was on the 25th floor. Chapter 648. Yun Xiaoyao looked at Yun Yang whom he had carried all the way back, his heart filled with shock and speechlessness. This ability was too formidable. It had to be said that the other party's ambush had indeed struck at the moment when everyone was unprepared. The other party's timing was right when all the assassin organizations and lone travelers were laying low. Even the Four Seasons Tower, which had suffered heavy losses due to the series of events earlier, had thought that the other forces would not make any moves in the near future, at least for the next few days. However, this ambush had come so suddenly. It had caught everyone off guard, and the lineup was so formidable. Even if Yun Xiaoyao thought about it now, this force against Yun Yang alone would be like a mountain crushing down on him, like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. Because of this, the other party's intention was simple and brutal, to kill with a single strike. To eliminate any future trouble. Yet, Yun Yang had managed to drag the battle to the very end in such a dire situation where there was absolutely no room for maneuver. It was only when their reinforcements had descended from the sky and surrounded the other party, wiping them out in one fell swoop. Yun Yang had even insisted on saying a few words before he fainted, unable to hold on any longer. The outcome was unbelievable, unimaginable, and appalling. It was beyond everyone's understanding. Yun Xiaoyao asked himself, if he had been in Yun Yang's shoes, would he have survived? Yun Xiaoyao had never been one to belittle himself. After he calmed himself down and weighed the pros and cons, he confirmed one thing: if he had been in Yun Yang's shoes, the other party would have gone back for a celebratory drink right now. There would be no accidents, no fluke. Thinking of this, Yun Xiaoyao could not help shuddering. On the other hand, Fang Mafei and Lao Mei remained composed, not even feeling that this matter was a legend or a myth. Looking at the crowd's shock, both of them were secretly pleased. Bunch of fools, what do you know? Young master, that's Supreme Cloud we're talking about. Everything he does and everything he encounters is beyond the reach of others. Even if such a thing was not common and common, it was nothing more than a daily occurrence. The rise and fall of a million-strong army could be decided with just a word from him. What more these mere assassins in front of them? A piece of cake. What was there to be afraid of? Was this the truth? Of course not. Fang Mei and her brother's situation was different from the four noble young masters. Their personal worship of Yun Yang had reached the point of following him blindly. Whatever Yun Yang did, it was reasonable and unreasonable. There was no logic or common sense. This was the legendary fan filter, there was no logic to it. The assassins who had been captured were now all imprisoned in the secret room. They had just been tied up to a pillar when a series of painful moans sounded out incessantly. Everyone couldn't help but be puzzled. We're just tying up a person. We haven't even tortured him yet, but he's already crying out in pain. They're really losing face for the assassins. But when they looked carefully, they all shivered. Each of the captive assassins was covered with wounds all over their bodies. Strictly speaking, these wounds were not deep. They only scratched the skin and did not penetrate into the muscles and bones. They were typical skin injuries. In spite of this, the number of scars was too many and each of them was about the same depth. It was shocking. At this moment, all of them were tied to the pillars. As they struggled, the repercussions of the countless saber scars were exposed. The one who was in the worst condition initially did not seem to have suffered much damage, and his clothes seemed to be intact. However, as he struggled, his clothes were torn to shreds, and he was covered in blood from head to toe. It was as if his entire body was covered in blood. Everyone present had the same thought: this fellow was fated to die. He would die without a doubt. Just the blood alone would be enough to kill him. In spite of this, the person's cry was full of vigor, without a hint of weakness. It hurt so much. Fang Mafei took a closer look and realized that the bleeding on the fellow's body had stopped automatically. After all, he was a high-level cultivator. His recovery rate from purely superficial wounds was far faster than that of an ordinary person, but the knife marks were still glaring. After a careful count, this unlucky fellow had such shallow scratches on his body. Starting from his scalp, his face, his chest, his shoulders, all the way to his calves, there were at least 235 of them. No, there were also 7 on the soles of his feet. They were all fresh wounds, not old wounds. That meant, there were a total of 242 saber marks. This did not include the 30 overcuts on his boots that did not penetrate the boots. Otherwise, the number would be even more. Fang Mafei swallowed involuntarily. Did this guy get killed by 1,000 cuts? How did he do it? The legendary death by 1,000 cuts technique was probably at this level. Moreover, there was another advantage to these saber marks. It saved the need to bandage these fellows' wounds. A high-level cultivator would be able to recover from such shallow wounds in 2 to 3 days. Of course, the most important factor was that there was no way to bandage them, and there was no way to treat them. The person with the fewest saber marks had more than 80 on him. How should he bandage them? Even if he bandaged them like dumplings, there would still be some who slipped through the net. Instead of that, he might as well not bandage them. They would not die anyway. Young Master's saber technique is really... Fang Mafei gasped in amazement. Amazing, just the saber marks on these people alone, young Master must have slashed at least 2,000 times. If that's the case, in today's short battle, young Master, Lao Mei took a deep breath, stunned by the number he thought of. The most conservative estimate would be more than 30,000 cuts. Fang Mafei had given an inaccurate estimate, but he was shocked by the number as well. In such a short period of time, against an enemy several times stronger than him, he had unleashed at least 30,000 slashes without pause. Furthermore, Fang Mafei knew very well that under such circumstances, 30,000 slashes would not be enough to preserve his life and create such a result. That was the most conservative and minimum number. No wonder. Fang Mafei said dumbfoundedly. What? Lao Mei did not understand. Didn't you see? Fang Mafei was a little distracted. Our young master's muscles are strained. His wrists, arms, and shoulders, they're all swollen. His wrists are swollen to the point that they're thicker than his thighs. Lao Mei was speechless. Fang Mafei looked at Lao Mei with soulless eyes and said, "Is it hard to imagine? It's thicker than your waist." Lao Mei thought, F***CKU. Your father is just a little thinner. In Yunyang's bedroom. Yunyang lay quietly on the bed, snoring and completely unconscious. This was a deep slumber after extreme exhaustion, but it was different from deep slumber. It could be considered a recovery state of hibernation. Ji Lingxi and Shengguan Lingxiu sat quietly on the bed, one at the head and the other at the foot. Yunyang was really just overly fatigued. There was nothing else wrong with him and he did not suffer from any serious internal injuries. It was only after the two ladies had checked him over and over again that they were reassured and were able to keep watch over him peacefully. Chapter 649. Taking care of Yunyang was not exactly ridiculous, but it was close enough. In spite of this, the two girls sat quietly. Initially, Shengguan Lingxiu had focused more of her attention on Yunyang, but after making sure that Yunyang was fine, she could not help shifting her attention to Ji Lingxi. She was shocked to realize that Ji Lingxi seemed to be very different from how she was previously. Her entire aura seemed to have undergone a drastic change. If she was not certain that the person before her was her best friend, it was hard to imagine how the same person could have such a different aura. Sister Lingxiu must have been frightened today. Ji Lingxi smiled gently. I've been too busy just now. I've neglected you. I'll go make tea for Sister Lingxiu. Shengguan Lingxiu smiled faintly. It's all right. With Yunyang's protection today, I'm very safe. Perhaps you don't believe me, but I've never been worried about what happened today from the beginning to the end. Ji Lingxi said, Sister Lingxiu is generous indeed. It's a pity that this fool has fought so hard. Shengguan Lingxiu replied, this is another matter. Today's battle is a trivial matter of life and death to me. I've long been indifferent to it, but Yunyang still has many concerns. Of course, he has to fight with all his might. Ji Lingxi smiled and said, Sister Lingxiu, you've seen through life and death and are open-minded. This little sister is just like this fool. I always think that it's better to be alive if I can. After all, only when I'm alive can I have the right to talk about the future. Shangguan Lingxiu's expression shifted slightly before returning to normal. Sister Lingxi is right. Of course, no one is willing to die if they can live. However, when it comes to a time where they have to choose between life and death, the choice has to be made eventually. Which is right and which is wrong, which is this and which is this? It's inevitable that they're stubborn. Ji Lingxi sighed and said, even if they're stubborn, they still have to see if it's worth it. Shangguan Lingxiu did not continue the conversation. She felt strange. Not only was Ji Lingxi's aura different today, her speech and behavior seemed to have changed as well. Her tongue was so sharp that Shangguan Lingxiu felt like she could not handle it. Even when Yu Rolan was still around, Shangguan Lingxiu had not felt that it was difficult to deal with these two women. In spite of this, Shangguan Lingxiu felt that she had nothing to say in response to Ji Lingxi's words today. Each and every one of them was laced with sarcasm. Shangguan Lingxiu was speechless while Ji Lingxi, who was sitting opposite her, felt uncomfortable as well. So what if Ji Lingxi had the upper hand in her argument? The reality was that Yunyang had gone through thick and thin with Shangguan Lingxiu. He had even risked his life for Shangguan Lingxiu, resulting in him being severely injured. Even if he was not severely injured, he was still injured. Everyone could see how dangerous the situation was. Ji Lingxi was even more afraid than her heart ached. Naturally, she was disgusted by Shangguan Lingxiu. However, she sighed and said, Lingxiu's words. I Sister Yang I Yangs of the Yang of Lingxis. What he said was the truth. Ji Lingxi asked herself honestly, could she walk away if she were in the same situation, let alone Yunyang? The only choice was to fight to the end like Yunyang. Live and die together. There was no other choice. Similarly, if Shangguan Lingxiu had been in the same position, she would not have let go and only cared about escaping alone. It was because of this that Ji Lingxi realized that her previous words had been too unreasonable. Embarrassed, the young girl apologized and made amends. Shangguan Lingxiu smiled, not feeling offended at all as she replied, the main reason why you said that is because you're worried about young Master Yun's safety. How could I not know that? Why would you be angry at me over such a matter? Actually, you're very open-minded. So what if you say that you've seen through life and death? If you've really seen through life and death, what I should have done was to kill myself when the enemy's encirclement was just a way of saying that I would die if I was unwilling. How could Shangguan Lingxiu not understand Ji Lingxi's feelings? Both girls smiled at each other, no longer holding a grudge. Ji Lingxi glanced at Yunyang who was lying on the bed, pursed her lips and sighed, saying, this fellow. You might say that he's unromantic, but he's quite, but you might say that he's a playboy. Sometimes, he's so wooden that it makes one want to beat him up. Even if you beat him to death, it won't be enough. How does he have the demeanor of Yutong's top popinjay? The last sentence was left unsaid in her heart. He's an unromantic piece of wood, but he's so good at flirting and flirting. For example, this lady in front of her, a heroine of her generation, was also captivated by this fellow. Shangguan Lingxiu blushed when she heard that and said faintly, actually, it's quite good that he's like this. It makes one feel at ease. Ji Lingxi sighed and glanced at Shangguan Lingxiu. She hesitated for a moment, the words circling in her mouth before she finally blurted them out, Sister Lingxiu, I heard that many people have gone to the Shangguan residence to propose marriage recently. I wonder, what are your plans, Sister Lingxiu? Shangguan Lingxiu looked at Shangguan Lingxiu. Shangguan Lingxiu's beautiful face dimmed for a moment. She smiled bitterly and said weakly, Sister, this is a good question. You really care about me. Ji Lingxi chuckled humorlessly as well and said, but this question can't be avoided. We have to face it eventually. Shangguan Lingxiu said in a low voice, how can I not know that this is unavoidable? I have to face it. I wonder how Sister Lingxi would choose and face it if you were in my position. Ji Lingxi sucked in a deep breath and said, Sister Lingxiu, there's no one else around now. Why don't we sisters have a heart-to-heart talk? Shangguan Lingxiu glanced at Yunyang who was lying on the bed and said in a low voice, all right. Ji Lingxi said softly, to be honest, this younger sister understands Sister Lingxiu's situation very well. I can empathize with Sister Lingxiu's feelings and know them very well. Shangguan Lingxiu sighed softly. I have to say, Sister Lingxiu, you're carrying too much on your shoulders. It's too tiring. If I were in your shoes, if I were Sister Lingxiu. Ji Lingxi gritted her teeth and said, if there's no such person in my heart, perhaps I'll just choose someone who's most beneficial to my family and whom I think is passable to marry. Life in this world is but a spring for the plants and trees, a lifetime without a heart. So what? However, if there's such a person in my heart, how can I say that I have no heart? I think, my choice. Ji Lingxi's eyes were filled with a heartfelt anguish as she said, is perhaps. I'd rather carry all of this myself and move forward with the burden. I'll carry it for as long as I can. Shangguan Lingxiu lowered her head and nodded silently. What Ji Lingxi had said was exactly what Shangguan Lingxiu was thinking. Almost every word was exactly the same, exactly the same. She could only feel her heartstrings trembling. Unable to control herself, she was almost about to burst into tears on the spot to release the emotions that had been suppressed for so long. The toughness that she had been pretending to be was completely shattered by these few words. Therefore, I think Sister Lingxiu has probably decided to spend the rest of her life alone. Ji Lingxi sighed softly, a hint of pity flashing across her eyes. Chapter 650. Ji Lingxi knew that once a lady as beautiful as Shangguan Lingxiu had fallen in love, her desire would never waver and would never change for the rest of her life. Putting herself in Yunyang's shoes, Shangguan Lingxiu could not care less about her reputation as a woman and expose herself to the public to drink with Yunyang. It was already a great feat for her. Furthermore, her intentions were clear. The elders of the Shangguan family of generals who were still alive were all getting old while the next generation of children and nephews had yet to grow up. At such a time, Shangguan Lingxiu, as the family's pillar of support, would never abandon her family for the sake of her marriage. As Yunyang's cultivation base grew higher, his future would not be limited to the empire of Yutang. Who knew when he would leave, and disappear? Once Yunyang left, it would be a long time before they could meet again. It was possible that they would never meet again. It was also possible that she would be an old woman by the time they met again. Instead of doing nothing, it was better for her to see him more, to have a meal more, to spend more time with him while she was still able to. If there came a day in the future, then these would be the memories of her life. After all, having something was better than having nothing at all. When this life was about to end and she was lying on her deathbed, recalling the past of her youth, at least in this life, she had loved him and we still had time to be alone. Ji Lingxi dared to guarantee that even if her guess was not entirely accurate, it was at least 80 to 90% correct. If she were in Shangguan Lingxiu's shoes, she would do the same. She would definitely do the same. She might even be more brazen than Shangguan Lingxiu, even more daring. Shangguan Lingxiu lowered her head and kept quiet for a long time. Finally, she lifted her head to look at Ji Lingxi and said softly, "That's right. Every single word that Sister Lingxi said is right. Every single word and every single sentence is what I'm thinking." She paused for a moment before continuing, "That's all I'm thinking about right now. Don't you think it's silly?" Ji Lingxi looked at her in a daze, not knowing where to start. Shangguan Lingxiu smiled calmly. In the Empire of Yutong, ordinary women get married when they turn 16. Many of them are already mothers when they're 17 or 18. I'm already 22 years old this year. Wait until the oldest of my 6 nephews can understand the ways of the world and take over part of the family's heavy responsibilities. At the very least, wait until he is 14 or 15 years old. But my oldest nephew is only 9 years old this year. In other words, Shangguan Lingxiu said in a low voice, "At the very least, I'll have to wait another 6 years before I can start trying to let it go. Even if it's 5 years. I'll be 27 years old by then. Actually, even if it really comes to that, can I really let it go? As for my nephew's side, no matter what, I still have to support him a little longer. Only when he can truly shoulder the heavy responsibility of the Shangguan family and become a qualified heir of the Shangguan family of generals, can I truly let go of the burden on my shoulders. That period of support should last at least a year. But at that time, I would be at least 28 years old." Shangguan Lingxiu smiled bitterly as she looked at Ji Lingxi. "Lingxi, do you know that an unmarried woman at the age of 28, in the Empire of Yutong, is already considered a middle-aged woman? When that time comes, it would be difficult for me to find someone to marry even if I don't have anyone I like. Those who match my age would already have wives and concubines. I look down even less on teenagers who are 15 or 16 years old. They're too childish after all. Actually, most of those teenagers wouldn't want to be as old as I am. If I really want to start a family in the future, I can only find those widowed men in their 30s or 40s. This is almost my only choice." Shangguan Lingxiu smiled faintly. "Instead of choosing such a fate, why not spend the rest of my life alone? What do you think?" Ji Lingxi could not help but nod in agreement. Indeed, if that was the case, it would be better to spend the rest of her life alone. "So, I'm not a threat to you," Shangguan Lingxiu said bitterly. Shangguan Lingxiu spoke bitterly. Her heart shattered into pieces after she uttered those words, unable to be mended. She paused before continuing, "I won't deny that I like Yun Yang, but I'm not a threat to you, not even the slightest bit." Ji Lingxi blushed and sighed softly. She walked over to hold Shangguan Lingxiu's hand and said seriously, "Sister Lingxiu, you've misunderstood the intention of my conversation with you. Listen to me first." Shangguan Lingxiu stared at her blankly as her hand was held. Ji Lingxi swallowed with difficulty and said, "Actually, you and I both know that since the beginning of time, men have had multiple wives and concubines throughout the ages, but women like you and I have never been willing to share our man with another woman." When she mentioned the words man, Ji Lingxi's blushing face turned even redder. After all, she was still a virgin. When she suddenly said these words, the shyness she felt was like an ocean or a tide that was difficult to suppress. Shangguan Lingxiu nodded in a daze. She really had no idea what Ji Lingxi was trying to say. "I'm not willing to do this either," said Ji Lingxi. "No matter how good, how outstanding, and how remarkable this woman is, I'm still not willing. Even if the world is like this and the customs are like this, I still won't agree to it. My man should only belong to me. He will only belong to me," Ji Lingxi said resolutely. Shangguan Lingxiu said softly, "You don't have to say anything more. I understand. I really do." She thought to herself, if it were me, I wouldn't be willing either. We're all women. Is it really necessary to say these things over and over again? Is this showing off? Ji Lingxi's chest heaved violently. She gripped Shangguan Lingxiu's hand tightly and said, "But, there's an uncontrollable situation now." Shangguan Lingxiu was at a loss. Uncontrollable? What uncontrollable situation? What do you mean by that? Ji Lingxi's eyes were tinged with embarrassment, but she continued boldly, "I mean, if, when the time comes. Sister Lingxiu, you can hand over the responsibility, if I still can't do that. Chapter 651. It took a while for Shangguan Lingxiu to understand the true meaning of Ji Lingxi's stuttering words. However, as soon as the realization dawned on her, her body trembled. She lifted her head and stared at Ji Lingxi in disbelief. To be together forever. Shangguan Lingxiu knew very well what this meant. I don't quite understand what you mean. Shangguan Lingxiu blushed as she stuttered, wringing her hands in embarrassment. It was not that she did not quite understand, she understood it all too well. Ji Lingxi's words had been condescending from the very beginning. At least to her, it sounded like she was advising her to give up and declaring her attitude, "This man is mine. You have no chance. Give up while it's still early." However, the last sentence was so earth-shattering that it had forcefully reversed the situation. This was the so-called divine reversal. The more it was so, the more Shangguan Lingxiu dared not believe it. It did not make sense. How could she not be controlled? How could she? Ji Lingxi's face was suddenly contorted in pain and helplessness. Even her lips were turning pale. "Of course I have my reasons. If it wasn't because I had no other choice, why would I have to make such a compromise? Sister Lingxiu, please believe me. If there was even the slightest possibility, I wouldn't have agreed to it. I wouldn't have said so." Shangguan Lingxiu's heart wrenched as worry crept into her face. She lowered her voice and asked anxiously, "What's wrong with you? Is there something wrong with your body?" This was the only reasonable explanation for Ji Lingxi's current choice. Ji Lingxi shook her head slowly. Shangguan Lingxiu frowned and said anxiously, "You have to talk about it first before we can talk about it. How can you solve it if you keep it to yourself?" She was genuinely worried for Ji Lingxi now. What exactly was the reason that could make such a proud and arrogant woman willingly give up on her own lover? Shangguan Lingxiu could not think of a reason no matter how hard she racked her brain. Judging from Ji Lingxi's behavior, it was Ji Lingxi who was in trouble, it had nothing to do with Yun Yang. Moreover, it was a serious matter, so serious that Ji Lingxi could only sigh helplessly. Then, how could this be a small matter? How could Shangguan Lingxiu not worry? Ji Lingxi's face flushed, then paled, then reddened, then paled again. After the cycle repeated a dozen times, she finally said hatefully, I must have been harmed by that old thing in my house." "That old thing in your house?" Shangguan Lingxiu was confused. "Who is it then? How did he harm you?" "The old man who gave birth to me but didn't raise me. It's fine if he didn't, but he loved me so much." Sigh. Ji Lingxi gritted her teeth and said fiercely. At this point, Ji Lingxi's long sigh was truly heart-wrenching. She was utterly speechless and helpless. Then, he was really speechless. He was speechless for a long time. Shangguan Lingxiu was dumbfounded, obviously confused by a certain someone's random narration. What does that mean? Why can't I understand a single word? What was going on? Sigh. Ji Lingxi sighed one after another while Shangguan Lingxiu could not help scratching her head, her eyes filled with confusion. After some time, Ji Lingxi bit her lip and came over shyly, whispering into Shangguan Lingxiu's ear, "Sigh, I can't say it." "This is..." Shangguan Lingxiu covered her red lips with one hand as she looked at Ji Lingxi. The look in her eyes was either curious, amused, incredulous, or inexplicably shocked. All in all, it was hard to describe the myriad of emotions in her eyes. Ji Lingxi felt like her face was burning. Say. I really don't know how long this will last. I don't even know if I'll be able to see this old thing again. How do I get rid of it? If you can't get rid of it, say. Ji Lingxi's expression turned gloomy again as she sighed faintly, looking forlorn. Shangguan Lingxiu sighed as well. She was helpless about this, and speechless. It was the first time she had heard of such a thing since the beginning of time. The old man's protection of his daughter was so tight that she could not even find a husband. Who would be willing to find a wife who would be bedridden for 2 months with just a hug and a kiss? There was no need to even think about the next step. Ji Lingxi had been an orphan since she was young. Who her parents were, where they were now, and whether they could be found in the future, all of these were still undetermined. How could the prohibition be lifted? If it could not be lifted, what could be done? Could it be that Yunyang and Ji Lingxi could only look at each other with a bench's distance for the rest of their lives? Would they continue to look at each other like this? There would not even be a possibility of lying on the same bed. Just thinking about it made one feel that it was strange, and also a great sorrow, right? Has it always been like this? Nothing has changed? Shangguan Lingxiu did not know what expression she should be wearing now. Ji Lingxi did not know what expression she should be wearing either. Sigh. Because of this, Yunyang has lain on the bed 3 times, intentionally or not. Cough, cough, cough. Shangguan Lingxiu choked subconsciously and began coughing violently. Ji Lingxi's face was flushed. Don't misunderstand. It was just a coincidence. Sigh. How should I put this? Although it's still too early. I don't want to give myself up just like that, but, how should I put this? Pfft, Shangguan Lingxiu really did not want to laugh. She knew that she should not laugh at this moment, but for some reason, she could not control herself and was convulsing with laughter. You! Ji Lingxi was enraged and sat aside with a pout. After a while, she could not help but burst out laughing as well. As she laughed, she sighed heavily. This matter was really inexplicable. Shangguan Lingxiu finally understood Ji Lingxi's thoughts. You can't do anything, you're reduced to a decorative vase, yet you're still hogging it and not letting anyone else touch it. How unreasonable is that? Just because you like it, you'll be an old virgin for the rest of your life. Does that mean the man you like has to be an old virgin as well? He still has to carry on the family line. Can you do it? Ji Lingxi had no choice but to make such a compromise. Ha ha ha, Shangguan Lingxiu covered her mouth, trembling with laughter. Ji Lingxi was extremely embarrassed. I'm worried to death and you're still laughing, worried to death. Shangguan Lingxiu chuckled again. Very worried indeed, very anxious. Ji Lingxi grew even more embarrassed. She pounced on Shangguan Lingxiu and the 2 girls tangled together. After a long time, Shangguan Lingxiu begged helplessly, "My dear sister, let me go." Ji Lingxi refused to let go, tickling Shangguan Lingxiu continuously. At this time, a confused voice called out, "What are you 2 doing?" Both girls froze at the same time. Turning to look, they saw that Yunyang had already woken up and was looking at them with a puzzled expression. His eyes were filled with bewilderment. How did these 2 girls become so close when he was unconscious? Chapter 652. It's none of your business. Shut up. Shut up. The 2 girls bellowed at Yunyang in unison, their auras surging and unstoppable. Yunyang's neck was turned to the side and he coughed forcefully to dissolve the awkward atmosphere, still confused. What's wrong? How did I offend them? He did not know that it was because he had not offended the 2 girls that they could only choose the most violent and unreasonable way to treat him. Otherwise, how could they dissolve the awkward atmosphere? What if someone saw through them? Yun-yang wanted to leave this seemingly hostile place. He raised his arm with great effort but groaned immediately. His physical exhaustion was secondary, his right arm was so swollen that it was unbearably painful. The moment he raised his arm, Yun-yang almost thought that he had lifted his thigh, the thickest part at that. This. Forget it, it's more important to cultivate and recuperate. Yun-yang, who had just closed his eyes and cultivated the endless divine art, widened his eyes again. What is going on? Am I dreaming? Even if it was a dream, it was a beautiful dream. Yun-yang's endless divine art had actually broken through. The fourth stage. The surging spiritual qi was like tangible threads that swam in his meridians at a steady and fast pace. Furthermore, the feeling that the threads gave Yun-yang was actually thick, solid, and resilient. Good and evil shall be repaid with 10,000 heads, the pillar of blood shall be severed from the middle stream, the noble spirit of the human realm shall be preserved, the 4 golden lotuses shall guard for the king. Yun-yang was stupefied. When did I do it? Have I really killed 10,000 villains? Why don't I feel anything about this? Ayaya, Emmy's clear, childish cry that it had not heard for a long time came from the space. Its voice was filled with agitation and excitement. In short, it was a cry of joy and joy. Yun-yang then remembered that his deific consciousness space had been reopened. Had Emmy, whom he had not seen for a long time, returned to his embrace? This explosive news made Yun-yang even more elated than the breakthrough of the endless divine art. Once he thought about it, he could not wait to immerse himself in it. As far as his divine sense could see, the space was filled with huge and shocking changes. First of all, the entire space had expanded by at least 4 times as much as before. Other than the plant that had grown to a height of 10 feet, there were also leaves so green that they were almost black and thick and tough vines that were hundreds of feet long. It was a sight to behold. As for the bottom 3 leaves, the area of each leaf was about half the size of a house. It would be a piece of cake to hold them up to shelter them from the wind and rain. Taking a closer look, the soft thorns on the plant's leaves, roots, and stalks looked sharper now, glinting with a cold glint. Yun-yang subconsciously felt a chill run down his spine as he took a look. Was this a lotus, or a cactus? This thorn, of course. What surprised Yun-yang the most was that at the top of Emmy's body, there was a newly grown, tender leaf that was swaying with the wind. The new leaf had yet to fully grow, only the size of a palm. Its tip was even curled, with a few drops of dew hanging on it. It was verdant and extremely adorable. 4-leaf golden lotus. Yun-yang heaved a long sigh of relief. It had finally grown. The deific consciousness space had finally been reopened. Only God knew how much suffering Yun-yang had gone through during this period of time and how much psychological pressure he had endured. He was truly afraid that the space would disappear or that he would never be able to contact it again, never to be reopened again. Now, however, this greatest fear, this gloom, had become a thing of the past, a thing of history, no longer existing. Yun-yang understood something more from this incident. Whether the space was sealed or not, the karmic qi of good and evil would not stop being absorbed as long as the wicked were killed. As for the karmic qi of good and evil from the endless divine art, it had never stopped. Although he couldn't contact the space, everything he had been doing during this period of time was to practice his martial arts. He had killed quite a number of people during this period of time, and the quality seemed to be rather high as well. As he thought about it, he suddenly felt his body tighten. A few vines had already wrapped themselves around him tightly. Emmy sprinted over happily and plunged into Yun-yang's embrace. Sprinted over. Sprinted over, Yun-yang hugged Emmy along the way, filled with joy. It was only after a while that he noticed something odd. Emmy was like a child, pulling its roots out of the soil and transforming into 2 legs as it sprinted over. What the F***ck, what new ability is this? It's too strange. Yunyang was dumbstruck. Since when did this little fellow have such a strange ability? Was it a tree-ant or a vegetable? Emmy's leaves caressed and rubbed against Yunyang's body, an indescribable sense of intimacy. It was like a young daughter who had been separated from her father for a long time, hugging her long-lost father and refusing to let go. Ayayayaya, Yunyang was beaming as he hugged Emmy. Emmy's spikes were extremely soft when it hugged Yunyang, crying out coquettishly without stopping. Yunyang carefully deciphered Emmy's words, word by word. The smile on his face grew wider, his mouth almost crooked from the wide grin. I've missed you so much. Wah, wah. That's great. Why are you taking so long? I'm going to ignore you if you don't come. Have you seen how much I've grown during this period of time? Look at this leaf, look at me, I've grown taller, so tall and big. Although there was not much substance to it, Yunyang's heart softened when he heard it. Pressing Emmy's leaves against his face, feeling the gentleness that came from the bottom of his heart and the childish coolness, Yunyang's smile grew warmer. It was like a father hugging his infatuated daughter, as if he was hugging the whole world, unwilling to let her go. Meow, 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 meow. 2 meows filled with grievance and disappointment rang out one after another. Yunyang lowered his head, feeling even more ecstatic. Beside his feet were 2 snow-white fur balls. The little things that were no bigger than a palm were looking up at him with eyes filled with grievance. They meowed as if complaining, "Master, why did you only see Emmy? Why did you ignore us? We've waited for you for so long as well." Chapter 653. Yunyang chortled and hugged the 2 fellows whom he had not seen for a long time. Without a word, they burrowed into Yunyang's embrace and stuck themselves comfortably against his skin, not moving an inch. To them, this was the place they were most familiar with, a place they had not seen for a long time. Old dreams replayed, lingering endlessly. Yunyang caressed the 2 fellows lightly. The 2 fellows were extremely satisfied, snoring comfortably in their throats while their ears fluttered. Their furry tails swayed back and forth, sometimes standing straight up like a flagpole, sometimes curling into a ball of fur, and sometimes swaying back and forth like a pendulum. Yunyang observed them carefully, worried, to make sure that Whitey 2 and Whitey 3's injuries were completely healed and that there was no longer any hidden danger. In addition, Yunyang realized that not only were Whitey 2 and Whitey 3 fully healed, they had even advanced. What was even more ridiculous was that they had advanced not just by 1 or 2 levels, but by 3 or 4 levels. Yunyang was surprised to find out that he could not see through the 2 Whiteys' current level at all. Could it be that these 2 furry little fellows' battle prowess has already surpassed mine? Was it possible? Surely not. No matter what, at the very least, compared to the 3 Whiteys at home, these 2 Whiteys' cultivation base had surpassed the eldest, and their level had increased significantly as well. Could it be that they can improve faster in the space? Otherwise, how could they have advanced so quickly? Yunyang pondered while stroking his chin. If that's the case, I should arrange for the other 3 Whiteys to come in and improve themselves as soon as possible. We're brothers after all, it wouldn't be good if there's a difference in our abilities. Chirp chirp. A crisp chirp could be heard. Yunyang frowned and looked towards the source of the sound. A tiny bird was hovering in front of him, its 2 round eyes looking at him with a tilted head. Its gaze was filled with friendliness, but of course, there was also a hint of disdain for competing with the 2 Whiteys. Chirp chirp. Compared to Emmy and Whitey, Yunyang had almost forgotten about this fellow. Seeing its arrival, he quickly beckoned for Gigi to land on his palm. After observing it carefully for a moment, he asked with a frown, "Gigi, what's wrong with you? Both of them have improved so much, but why haven't you grown any fur?" Are you slacking off and not cultivating properly? Chirp 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 chirp. Gigi chirped again, tilted its head, and put on a look that was even more disdainful than before. The general meaning was, "This lord is a divine beast, how can advancing be as easy as these two idiots?" The two whiteys were enraged when they heard that. They dashed out at a speed faster than Yun Yang could react and pinned Ha under their bodies, ravaging it. Even though it was a divine beast, it was still very young, not to mention, whether or not it was a divine beast still remained to be verified. Gigi shrieked and struggled with all its might. After a while, it finally escaped from under the two whiteys and flew to Yun Yang, flapping its bare wings. Then, it made a move. One of its wings flapped while the other drooped down, pointing the tip of its wing at the two whiteys. Its eyes were on Yun Yang, and its expression was fierce and its words were hurried as it chirped angrily. It was obvious that he was complaining about the two white beasts' terrible behavior of bullying the divine beasts by waving their hands and feet and chattering. This fellow had really grown up. He even knew how to snitch on others. Yun Yang could not help but feel amused. As for the personal grudges between the two of you, Yun Yang said seriously, I won't interfere. You can settle it yourselves. Hearing this, Haji immediately became dejected and discouraged. The two whiteys, on the other hand, were full of arrogance and high-spirited. Ayaya, an angry cry rang out like an alarm. Emmy was furious. Today was supposed to be a joyous day of reunion, but these three fellows still wanted to fight amongst themselves. Can't you be a little more promising and have some face? Did they know that their actions were going to piss off your boss? Ayayayayaya, Emmy roared agitatedly, basically saying, whoever fights again will be chased out and never allowed to enter again. With this threat, the three of them instantly gave up and became as obedient as they could be. They were as cute and adorable as they could be, as adorable as they could be. To them, entering this space to cultivate was a great thing. How could they not be allowed to enter? Who knew how long it would take for them to improve so much if they were to cultivate outside? After a long while of excitement, Yun Yang finally remembered to check on his current situation. When he first activated the power of the fourth tier of the endless divine art, Yun Yang felt as if he was invincible in this world. This was, of course, an illusion. However, it was just an illusion. The huge improvement brought about by this advancement still made Yun Yang feel as if he had been reborn. This was the real deal, the real deal. Firstly, his cultivation base had increased tremendously. It had soared to the third tier of Tao realm, and it was even the pinnacle of the third tier. This was already a huge surprise, but what surprised Yun Yang even more was that 2 more chakras had been awakened in his body. Initially, it was already unprecedented in Tianxian continent for him to have 10 awakened chakras. After the prolonged battle with the assassins, he had managed to awaken his chakras at the final stage, bringing the total number of chakras to 12. It was something that was beyond the knowledge of any cultivator in this world. Now, he had awakened another one, making it a total of 14 chakras. What kind of situation was this? Was it even more extraordinary than the world, even more extraordinary than what was known to the world? Yun Yang was overwhelmed with surprise and bewilderment. 9 chakras was already the limit for people in Tianxian continent, but what was going on with 14 awakened chakras? What was going on? What kind of situation was this? Furthermore, if things continued like this, would Big Brother's chakras continue to be awakened as he progressed to the 5th and 6th level? How many could he awaken in the end? Furthermore, how many chakras could be awakened in a human body? Initially, Yun Yang had thought that 10 chakras was already the limit. After all, there were only 10 holes on a person's body: 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, mouth, belly button, cough, and the front and the back. That, Yun Yang had scoffed at the original theory of 9 chakras. He had researched this principle himself. It was on the day he awakened 10 chakras that Yun Yang had realized it and called it a unique secret. Now, however, Yun Yang realized that his so-called realization and unique secret back then were all bullshit. Forget it, let's not think about this troublesome problem for now. No matter how unimaginable the current situation was, it was still a good thing. He checked his body condition again and again, confirming that the circulation speed of his essential energy was at least 10 times faster than before. The purity of his mystical qi was also a few times better than before. As for the specific and precise degree of improvement, it could only be confirmed after seeing the actual combat effect. Amidst the huge improvement in his cultivation base, the reopening of the space, and the reappearance of Emmy, Yun Yang was even more pleased with the fact that his old partner, his most beloved weapon, the divine edge, had finally returned to his hands. He had almost forgotten that the breakthrough in his cultivation base also meant that Saber Truth, Destiny Blade would reveal a new brilliance and a new killing move. The long-awaited fourth form of Saber Truth, Destiny Blade was still a form with 2 styles. The first style, Wind Beyond the Sky, the second style, Mountain of White Bones. Chapter 654. The fourth style, Saber Truth, Destiny Blade, was different from the first 3 styles of Saber Truth, Destiny Blade's offense and defense. It was flawless and sharp. This style and 2 styles were pure killing moves. It was a stunning strike from an unparalleled assassin, filled with boundless killing intent. Wind Beyond the Sky was a killing move that came out of nowhere. This style was targeted at an enemy who was fighting alone. It was full of surprises and was impossible to defend against. Of course, the style was not without its flaws. When it was executed, the mystical energy of the entire body had to be unleashed in a single blow. This brought about a negative side effect. Whether the move hit its target or not, a considerable amount of mystical qi would be expended. As for the second style, Mountain of White Bones, it reflected the power of the style in its killing intent. Once the style was executed, only a mountain of white bones would remain, no matter how many enemies there were in front of it. In spite of this, the killing intent of the style and 2 styles was already shocking to Yun Yang just by looking at it. The other point was the mantra of the style. Wind Beyond the Sky rises in the cold of the mortal world, the concourse of the underworld is built under the saber. These 3 words, concourse of the underworld, Yun Yang could not help but connect the dots. Was this just a coincidence with the assassin organization, the concourse of the underworld? This was truly thought-provoking and thought-provoking. At this time, Whitey 2 and Whitey 3 began to target Yun Yang's crotch together, raising their heads and mewling pleadingly, obviously wanting to go out. It had been a long time since they had left home. How could they not miss it? Previously, the space was locked and they could not do anything about it. Now that they had seen their master again, it meant that they could return to the world. How could they not be tempted? They had not seen their brothers for such a long time. Although Yun Yang was still immersed in the new realm, he did not think much of it and simply waved his hand in agreement. Go out yourself. When Shengguan Lingxiu and Ji Lingxi saw that Yun Yang had woken up, they looked awkward and their tone was fiery, but they were actually overjoyed. Seeing that he had only said a few words before he began to cultivate, how could they not know that Yun Yang had been severely injured this time? They would not disturb him, quietly waiting for him to wake up for the second time. Lingxi, look at his arm. Shengguan Lingxiu stared worriedly at Yun Yang's shoulder that was swollen to the point where it was thicker than his thigh. Ji Lingxi was unconcerned. She took a casual glance and said, if an ordinary person were to swell up like this, his arm would probably be crippled. However, an ace mystical cultivator's physique and self-recovery ability are incomparable to an ordinary person's. Yun Yang's cultivation method is focused on nourishing the body and blood, so he'll definitely be fine. There's a limit to what we can do about his condition. Whether it's using our mystical qi cultivation base or medicinal herbs to promote blood circulation and disperse blood clots, we can only alleviate the condition slightly. It's difficult to completely cure the symptoms. On the other hand, if Yun Yang were to use his own mystical qi to restore this arm to its original state, not only would it not be damaged, the tendons and meridians of this arm would be enhanced greatly instead. This is actually a good thing for him. Oh, I see. Shangguan Lingxiu nodded, completely relieved. After a while, Yun Yang was still immersed in a deep state of recuperation. Seeing that Yun Yang did not move for a long time, the two ladies who were unwilling to be left out turned to chat in low voices. Ji Lingxi, who had just changed the topic, turned her head unintentionally and her eyes suddenly bulged. Shangguan Lingxiu followed Ji Lingxi's gaze. Huh? Yun Yang, who was lying on the ground, had his swollen arm and shoulder shrunk significantly, almost resembling a human's. As the two ladies continued to stare at him, the swelling was diminishing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It had shrunk once more. It had shrunk once more. It had shrunk once more. Then, it returned to its normal state. Ji Lingxi, who had witnessed the entire process, was so shocked that her eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Shangguan Lingxiu might not have experienced Yun Yang's swelling before, but Ji Lingxi had experienced it many times and was well aware of the changes in his condition. From what Ji Lingxi knew, even if it was not as horrifying as Yun Yang's, it would still take at least 5 to 6 days to recover. Although he had spoken to Shangguan Lingxiu in a nonchalant manner, he was actually trying to comfort her. Based on Ji Lingxi's understanding of Yun Yang's swelling, it would take at least half a month or even a month for him to fully recover. Now, however, Yun Yang's arm that was so swollen that it did not resemble a human's had completely gone. What is going on? This is unbelievable. Ji Lingxi stretched her hand out to touch Yun Yang's arm, murmuring as if she was dreaming. Shangguan Lingxiu was nervous as she watched. She swallowed and said, "Lingxi, is it all right for you to touch him?" In other words, why was there no light? Huh? Ji Lingxi turned her head. She was initially puzzled by Shangguan Lingxiu's question, but she understood immediately. She blushed and said awkwardly, "I touched him. I touched him." "Oh, Sister Lingxiu, you're really... What are you talking about?" Shangguan Lingxiu was speechless. "You're allowed to touch him, but I'm not allowed to talk about it." Ji Lingxi blushed furiously. "I'm not allowed to." "Sister Lingxiu, why don't you come and touch him as well? I'm not seeing things, am I?" Shangguan Lingxiu was obviously worried as well. She extended her hand to touch it, pressing and pinching it before she said, "The swelling has really gone down. The muscles are firm again. This feeling is real." After confirming this, the two girls were once again at a loss. What is going on? How can it recover so quickly? The two women could be considered to be knowledgeable people, but they had never seen the swelling go down so quickly and so nimbly. Just as the two girls were feeling suspicious, they were shocked to see, Yun Yang's abdomen seemed to be slightly bulging. Both girls' eyes widened at once. That place, bulged up bit by bit, as if something was slowly wriggling in that position. The two girls blushed and spat inwardly, but then they realized that the reason for the change in the position was different from what they had imagined. It was even stranger. The reason why the two girls came up with a different conclusion was that the bulging lump didn't stop at its initial position. Instead, it was gradually moving upwards, swimming all the way up. Finally, under the girls' dumbfounded gazes, a furry little head popped out from Yun Yang's robe. Its timid eyes darted around before it raised its head and meowed, "Meow." Hearing the meow, the two girls were petrified. For pretty eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. From his abdomen, it began to move, and then, a palm-sized kitten crawled out, Shangguan Lingxiu was so shocked that her vision darkened. Her breathing quickened as she stuttered, he actually gave birth to a cat. Ji Lingxi stared blankly as well. This is more than that. Yun Yang's abdomen had begun to wriggle for the second time. Then, it continued to move upwards like before, and finally, meow. Another kitten the size of a palm crawled out of the hole. Could they be twins? Chapter 655. Oh, for a moment, Ji Lingxi felt her vision darken. Her body swayed, unable to maintain itself. Shangguan Lingxiu hurried over to support her. Both girls only had one thought in their minds: were they in a nightmare? Their minds were filled with a cacophony of noises. Ji Lingxi was thinking, I thought he couldn't do that. Turns out, he can actually give birth on his own. But why is he giving birth to cats? Shangguan Lingxiu was thinking, could this Yun Yang be a cat that has turned into a demon? And he should be a female cat? Otherwise, how could she have given birth to a pair of kittens, and a pair of twins at once? The two kittens could be confirmed to be twins with a single glance. There was no doubt about it. How absurd is this? Compared to the two girls' confusion, the two cats were not bewildered. After all, to Whitey 2 and Whitey 3, both Ji Lingxi and Shangguan Lingxiu were their master's acquaintances. Naturally, they were unconcerned when they saw the two of them. When they returned to the mortal world again, they only meowed twice to greet him. Then, they wagged their tails and jumped down from a certain someone's body. Their snow-white little bodies were like two little pom-poms rolling down from the bed, stunning and pleasing to the eye. They rubbed themselves against Ji Lingxi and Shangguan Lingxiu's thighs intimately and familiarly before walking out, wagging their tails and wagging their heads. It was as if no one else was around. Meow, 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 with a few cheerful meows, Big Whitey, Whitey 4, Whitey 5, and Whitey Big dashed over, the 5 snow-white pom-poms rolling around in a ball of joy. Ji Lingxi mumbled unconsciously, so it's Whitey 2 and Whitey 3, it was only when she finished that she exclaimed, it's Whitey 2 and Whitey 3? Shangguan Lingxiu asked dizzily, what? What Whitey? Actually, Shangguan Lingxiu had seen a few Whiteys a long time ago. She had even interacted with them during her trip to the Empire of Zio, but she had never seen Whitey 2 and Whitey 3 in their current state. It was probably because what she had seen was too shocking that her train of thought had gone off the rails, resulting in her current state of confusion. These two aren't Yun Yangs. Ji Lingxi did not know whether to laugh or to cry. She covered her forehead with her hand, feeling that she had made a huge blunder. These two are actually Yun Yang's pets. There are a few of them. They're not just twins, they're twins. Shangguan Lingxiu recognized it immediately as well. She blushed and coughed twice, speechless for a moment. The two women looked at each other, their eyes filled with the embarrassment on each other's faces. What was I thinking just now? I actually thought that these two little things were Yun Yangs. Could he have given birth to them? And what the hell was that cat spirit? And what the hell was a female cat? This train of thought, this brain hole, it was simply, it's just that, when did these two little things get on the bed? Why didn't we notice? Why did they burrow into Yun Yang's clothes, and in that position? Shangguan Lingxiu asked in surprise. Ji Lingxi's eyes darted around as she giggled. Sister Lingxiu was so focused on her lover just now that she probably didn't see anything else. Shangguan Lingxiu was embarrassed and said, you little girl, your mouth is full of filthy words. You're the one who's spouting nonsense. Yun Yang was still immersed in his new realm and had yet to truly wake up. Therefore, Shangguan Lingxiu and Ji Lingxi sat until dinner before they finally agreed to go eat. Let's go eat first. This fellow should be fine after dinner. Coincidentally, the two ladies were in the midst of eating. A silhouette flashed by the door. Yun-yang walked in clean, looking like a starving ghost. "Oh, I'm starving to death. Why didn't you two greet me when you came to eat?" Under the two ladies' dumbfounded gaze, Yun-yang devoured the table full of dishes. The entire process only took a few breaths. "What are you two looking at? Serve the dishes quickly." Yun-yang felt like he had become a bottomless pit once again, the long-awaited state of hunger returning. His stomach felt like it could never be filled, it was so empty that he could eat a dragon. Therefore, the residents of Yun's chefs were all busy. Fortunately, a significant portion of the residents of Yun's chefs were experienced and had a rather deep impression of Yun-yang's gluttonous state. Even if they were not able to cope with it easily, they were not flustered. They were still methodical and had a few tricks up their sleeves. Ji Lingxi and Shengguan Lingxiu watched as Yun-yang gobbled down 3 whole tables of food before he put down his chopsticks. "Yun-yang, are you full?" Ji Lingxi swallowed. The corners of her lips twitched as she looked at the 16 empty plates on the table. This was the 3rd table, including the one in front. It was already the 4th table. "I'm full." Yun-yang was slightly embarrassed as he held his belly and chuckled dryly. "Why aren't you two eating?" "Eating?" The corners of the two girls' mouths twitched. "Forget about eating, we're already full just from looking at him." "We want to puke now, we're not hungry," the two girls said in unison. "Yun-yang, are your injuries healed?" Shengguan Lingxiu asked with concern. "Yes, they're all healed." "Healed? All healed? Really?" Shengguan Lingxiu was rather worried. "Don't worry, he's really all healed." Ji Lingxi squinted at him. "Not only that, his cultivation base has improved a lot too." "Don't you think so, great young Master Yun, great expert Yun?" Yun-yang squinted as well. "Not exactly, but not far. Perhaps I'm not a great expert, but... Great young lady Ji, I'm not afraid of you now." Ji Lingxi stood up gracefully. "You say you're not afraid, but what about your body? Why don't you try?" "Let's try." Yun-yang had the same intention. Ji Lingxi had been tormenting him for the past few days, she had been beaten the entire time. How could he miss the rare opportunity to retaliate? His cultivation base has improved tremendously. He would definitely teach this little girl a lesson. Just as Ji Lingxi was about to leave, Shengguan Lingxiu pulled on her sleeve. "You try." "I want to see, to confirm it with my own eyes." Ji Lingxi was speechless. "Sister, is this a deliberate confirmation? Do you have to be so hesitant? It's like you're up to something. On the drill ground. Come on." Ji Lingxi was calm and composed. Yun-yang guffawed, feeling the surging energy in his body. He was already confident that he would win. With his arms behind his back, he pretended to be indifferent like a master and said, "Lingxi, you have to deal with it properly this time. Be more careful. My cultivation base has improved tremendously now. I'm afraid that I won't be able to hold back and hurt you by mistake." Ji Lingxi snorted. "I'll send you flying with one move." "Ha ha ha." Amidst the laughter, a purple silhouette flashed. Yun-yang had already charged over like a bolt of lightning, tearing the space apart in a flash. Both his hands glowed like white jade as he slammed them down on Ji Lingxi's shoulders. Shengguan Lingxiu watched on anxiously from the side. Yun-yang and Ji Lingxi's current level of ability had long surpassed Shengguan Lingxiu's knowledge. However, the simplest and most direct exchange of blows was still within the scope of observation. Of course, this was also because both of them had yet to unleash their maximum speed. Otherwise, Shengguan Lingxiu would only be able to see 2 balls of light. Ji Lingxi snorted. She really wanted to try and see if Yun Yang could dispel the mysterious red light after his advancement. Taking 2 steps back, he suddenly raised his head and bent his body backwards. Not only did Yun Yang's palm that was initially aimed at Ji Lingxi's shoulders deviate from his original intention, but it was also aimed at Ji Lingxi's perky chest instead. Cough. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.